The fire had its own language, and Jack Mitchell had learned to speak it fluently over 20 years of watching forests burn. He stood on the ridge above Sun Valley, Idaho, his boots planted in ash that was still hot enough to melt the rubber if he stayed too long in one spot. Below him, 18 men and women worked the line with Pulaskis and chainsaws, cutting a break between the advancing wall of flame and 300 acres of old-growth pine that hadn't burned in a century. The wind was wrong. Jack could feel it shifting, the way a man feels the temperature drop before a storm arrives. He'd been crew boss long enough to trust his instincts more than the weather reports crackling through his radio. The sky had gone the color of a bruised plum, purple and orange, and sick yellow all mixed together. Smoke rolled overhead in columns that looked solid enough to climb. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful when you've stopped being afraid of them and started being afraid of what happens when you turn away. Jack had stopped turning away from dangerous things the day his wife died 3 years ago. Since then, he'd walked into fires that sent younger men running, not because he was brave, because part of him didn't particularly care whether he walked back out. His radio crackled. Johnson's voice, tight with the kind of control that meant panic was close behind. Spot fire jumped the line. Southeast corner. We need the tanker now. Jack was already moving before Johnson finished talking. He'd seen the ember shower 5 minutes earlier, watched the wind catch a chunk of burning bark the size of a dinner plate and carry it 200 yards into unburned territory. He'd called for the tanker then, but bureaucracy moved slower than fire. Now the spot had grown into its own inferno, and the main blaze was pushing toward it like two lovers reaching across a dance floor. When they met, they'd create a firestorm that would trap his entire crew in a pocket with nowhere to go except through flame. He keyed his radio, voice calm, in the way that makes men listen instead of panic. All units, this is Mitchell. We're executing an emergency extraction. Head west to the highway, double time. Leave the gear. Move now. The crew knew better than to argue. They dropped tools and ran, their bright yellow Nomex suits flickering through the smoke like a line of canaries fleeing a collapsing mine. Jack stayed on the ridge, counting them as they passed. 18 had gone down. 18 needed to come up. 14, 15, 16. The wind gusted hard enough to stagger him, and the temperature spiked 20 degrees in as many seconds. The two fires were about to merge. 17. Where was 18? Jack scanned the smoke, already knowing who was missing. Davies, the rookie from Oregon, 23 years old and convinced he was invincible because he'd survived 2 seasons without a close call. Jack had tried to mentor that confidence into caution, but some men needed to learn fear the hard way. He found Davies 40 yards down the slope, pinned under a widowmaker that had chosen that exact moment to fall. The tree wasn't large, maybe 8 inches at the base, but it had Davies' leg trapped, and the kid was yanking at it with the kind of strength that comes from pure animal terror. The fire was 100 yards out and closing fast, driven by wind that was now gusting hard enough to carry embers the size of fists. Jack reached to him in 30 seconds, dropped to his knees beside the tree. Davies' face was white beneath the ash and soot. I can't move it. I can't. Jack didn't waste breath on reassurance. He braced his back against the trunk, found purchase in the ash with his boots, and lifted with his legs the way he'd been taught 20 years ago in a gym at Camp Pendleton. The tree shifted. Davies pulled his leg free. They ran. The fire caught them anyway. Not the main blaze, but a tongue of flame that licked across the ground faster than a man could sprint, feeding on pine needles and dried grass in desperation. Jack felt the heat on his back like a physical hand shoving him forward, his lungs filled with superheated air. Davies stumbled. Jack grabbed his collar, half carrying, half dragging the younger man the last 50 yards to the highway, where the rest of the crew waited beside the tanker truck. They collapsed on the asphalt, coughing smoke and gulping air that tasted like ash and diesel fumes. Davies was crying, whether from pain or relief or shame. Jack couldn't tell and didn't ask. He just sat there on the warm pavement, watching the forest he'd failed to save turn into a column of smoke and ember that rose 2 miles into the evening sky. Johnson dropped down beside him, offered a bottle of water that was too warm to be refreshing, but wet enough to wash some of the taste of smoke from Jack's mouth. You saved his life. Jack took a long drink before answering. Sarah would have called it reckless. Lily would calculate the statistical probability of success and inform him it was 17%. He'd done it anyway, the way he did everything now, with the kind of focus that comes from having nothing left to lose except the work itself. Just doing the job. But that was a lie, and Johnson was smart enough not to call him on it. Jack wasn't doing the job. He was running from everything the job used to mean. Family, home, a reason to come back when the season ended and the fires went out. Now when the season ended, he just found another fire. Last year, he had worked 6 months straight without a day off, chasing blazes from California to Montana to the Yukon. Lily stayed in the trailer they'd rented in whatever town he was staging out of, teaching herself calculus and computer science and God knew what else from online courses, while her father tried to burn away grief one forest at a time. The crew loaded up. Jack rode in the cab of the truck, watching the fire recede in the side mirror until it was just a glow on the horizon. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, insistent. The third buzz made him pull it out. FedEx overnight delivery requiring signature. Package from Tennessee probate office. Attempted delivery to trailer. Driver will try again tomorrow, 8 a.m. Tennessee. The word sat in his mind like a stone dropped in still water, spreading ripples that disturbed things he'd worked very hard to keep buried. He hadn't been to Tennessee in 20 years. Hadn't spoken to Ruth Blackwood since the wedding, when she'd made it clear that Jack wasn't good enough for her daughter and never would be. Sarah had chosen him anyway, and they'd built a life 2,000 miles from the Smoky Mountains and the cabin Ruth refused to leave, and the old woman's warnings about mountains that remembered and debts that came due. Now Ruth was dead. Had been for 2 years, according to the obituary Sarah had shown him shortly before her own death. Jack had felt nothing then except a vague relief that the woman who'd never approved of him could no longer find new ways to express that disapproval. Sarah had driven to Tennessee for the funeral alone. Lily had stayed with Jack. When Sarah came back, she'd been quiet in a way that wasn't like her, turning something over in her mind that she wouldn't share. 2 weeks later, her car had gone off a mountain road in Montana, and Jack had stopped asking questions about anything. The trailer was dark when he got back at 11 p.m. He unlocked the door as quietly as possible, trying not to wake Lily, but the light was on in her room and he could see the glow of her laptop screen under the door. She'd be doing differential equations, or writing code, or mapping star formations. Her autism a gift that let her see patterns invisible to everyone else, and a curse that made the chaotic mess of human interaction almost unbearable. Jack loved her with a fierceness that sometimes scared him, but he had no idea how to talk to her. Sarah had been the bridge between them. Without her, they were two people living in the same small space, orbiting each other like planets that shared a sun but never touched. He heated water on the camp stove, made instant coffee that tasted like regret, and sat at the fold-down table that served as their kitchen. The FedEx notice was still on his phone, Tennessee probate office. There was only one reason they'd be contacting him. Ruth's estate, which meant property, because the woman had died with nothing except 80 acres of mountain forest in a cabin that was probably falling down by now. He should delete the notice. Let FedEx send the package back. Whatever Ruth had left behind wasn't his problem. But Sarah's face appeared in his mind, the way she'd looked coming back from that funeral. Troubled, almost frightened. She'd wanted to tell him something and hadn't, and 2 weeks later, she died on a road she'd driven 100 times before without incident. His phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to pick it up. He pulled up the Montana Highway Patrol report on Sarah's accident. Single vehicle collision, lost control on curve, no witnesses, no mechanical failure found, weather clear, road conditions good. Conclusion, driver error, case closed. Jack had read the report a dozen times in the first year after her death, looking for something that would make sense of losing her. He had never found it. Sarah was one of the best drivers he'd known, steady and careful and completely at home on mountain roads. Driver error felt wrong the way a false note feels wrong in a familiar song. But grief made you grasp at conspiracies, made you think there had to be a reason, a villain, someone to blame besides chance and physics and the casual cruelty of a universe that took good people for no reason at all. He closed the report, opened his email, started typing a message to the crew supervisor requesting a week of personal time. His finger hovered over the send button. Taking time off meant going back to the trailer and the silence and the weight of everything he'd been running from. But the FedEx notice pulled at him like a fishhook buried deep. He pressed send. Morning came with the kind of clarity that high-altitude desert provides. All sharp edges and long shadows, and air so dry it pulled moisture from your lungs with every breath. Jack was waiting when the FedEx truck arrived at 8:15. The driver, a woman in her 60s with the patient expression of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with every variety of human strangeness, handed him a thick envelope and a tablet to sign. From a law office in Gatlinburg, heavy paper, the kind that announced importance. Jack carried it inside, set it on the table, stared at it for 5 minutes before opening it. Inside was a letter on law firm letterhead and a thumb drive in a small plastic case. The letter was brief. Mr. Mitchell, Ruth Blackwood's estate has completed probate. As named executor, I'm required to deliver this recording to you personally. Mrs. Blackwood left explicit instructions that you watch this video alone before making any decisions regarding the property. Please contact our office after viewing to discuss next steps. The signature belonged to someone named Howard Chen, attorney at law. The thumb drive was unmarked except for a date written in faded Sharpie. April 2019, 4 years ago, a year before Sarah's death. Jack's hands were steady as he plugged the drive into his laptop, but something cold was spreading through his chest. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the certainty that whatever was on this drive would change things in ways he couldn't predict or control. The video opened on Ruth Blackwood sitting in a wooden chair in a room Jack recognized from the single photograph Sarah had kept. The cabin's main room, log walls and a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out on forest. Ruth was old, 78 according to the date, but she sat like a woman 20 years younger. Straight-backed, alert. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and they looked directly into the camera with an intensity that made Jack feel like she was sitting across from him. Her voice when she spoke was rough-edged but clear. Jack Mitchell, you never liked me. I never liked you. You took my daughter away from these mountains. But Sarah loved you, so I respected that. Jack's coffee had gone cold in his hand. I'm recording this in April of 2019. If you're watching it, Sarah is dead, and it wasn't an accident. The laptop screen seemed to brighten, or maybe the trailer had grown darker. Jack couldn't tell. Ruth continued speaking, and every word landed like a stone thrown into deep water. Apex Mining Corporation has been watching this property for 35 years. I've fought them in court, in county meetings, in every public forum available. They've called me crazy, paranoid, a bitter old woman clinging to worthless land. What they haven't done is leave me alone, because this land isn't worthless. Under these 80 acres is one of the richest lithium deposits in the eastern United States. And in 1987, Apex drilled on my property without permission, without payment, and without leaving any record that could tie them to the theft. Ruth leaned forward slightly, her eyes burning with something between rage and grief. I have proof, core samples they were supposed to destroy, documents showing illegal drilling, evidence that would cost them everything they've built here. I tried to use it 30 years ago. They made sure no one believed me. Then they waited for me to die so the evidence would die with me. But I didn't leave it where they could find it. I hid it in a place they don't know exists. And I'm leaving the property to Lily, your daughter, through a trust you control. Jack's breath had stopped somewhere around the word lithium and hadn't started again. Your wife called me 2 weeks before she died. She'd found some of my old legal documents while helping clean out a storage unit. She asked me questions, good questions, the kind of questions that meant she understood what she was looking at. I warned her to be careful, told her Apex had killed before, would kill again. She said she'd be careful. Ruth's face hardened into something that looked like sorrow wrapped around steel. Then her car went off the road. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses. And I knew. The same way you know, if you're honest with yourself, Sarah didn't make mistakes on mountain roads. She was murdered, and they made it look like chance, because that's what they do. They're very good at it. The video paused, or seemed to. Ruth took a breath, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of someone delivering a message from beyond the grave. The cabin is maintained. I've arranged for someone local to keep it from falling down completely. The evidence is hidden in a stone building behind the property at GPS coordinates I've written on the paper in this envelope. I only took 3 samples because I was being watched. There should be 47 crates total if they haven't found it and destroyed everything. You have three choices, Jack. Take what I've left and contact a lawyer. You and Lily will likely be dead within a month. They can't let this information go public. Or you can bury the drive, walk away, and hope they decide you're not a threat. They might let you live. Probably will. As long as you never go near that property or start asking questions. Ruth's expression softened fractionally. Or you can fight. Find the evidence. Make it so public they can't bury it. Use your training, your skills, everything the Marines taught you about surviving in hostile territory. Go at night, document everything, make copies, distribute them before you surface. Then come at them in daylight where witnesses exist and cameras are rolling. Make it too expensive to kill you. She was quiet for a moment, and Jack could hear wind in the trees outside the cabin where the video had been recorded. A sound he hadn't heard in 20 years but recognized immediately. The sound of the Smoky Mountains breathing. Sarah died because she asked questions. Lily deserves to know her mother didn't die from bad luck or driver error. She died because she found the truth. And truth in this world is dangerous. Ruth reached forward. Her hand moved toward the camera. There's one more thing. The first night you're at the cabin, you'll see Ghost. He's a white horse, old, impossible but real. When he comes, follow him. Don't be afraid. He's family. He'll show you the way. The screen went black. Jack sat in the silence of the trailer, his coffee stone cold, his heart beating in a rhythm that felt wrong. The words "she was murdered" kept repeating in his head like a song stuck on a broken record. He'd known. Some part of him had always known. But knowing and having confirmation were different countries, and the border between them was a chasm he'd been too afraid to cross. Until now. He ejected the drive, held it in his palm. It weighed almost nothing. Light as a poker chip, heavy as 3 years of grief crystallized into evidence and accusation. If Ruth was right, if Sarah had been killed, then the last 3 years of his life had been built on a lie. His wife hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered for asking questions about an old woman's mountain property and a mining company's theft. He should call the police, the FBI, someone with authority and jurisdiction and the power to investigate without getting killed. But Ruth's voice echoed in his mind. They're very good at making things look like accidents. If Sarah had been murdered and the investigation had concluded driver error, then Apex Mining had reach and resources beyond what local law enforcement could handle. Going to the authorities might just get him, and Lily added to the list of unfortunate accidents. The bedroom door opened. Lily emerged, her dark hair uncombed, wearing an oversized hoodie and sweatpants, her fingers already working at the Rubik's Cube she carried everywhere. She didn't look at him directly, but she was aware of him in the way she was aware of everything, processing information through channels Jack didn't understand. You requested time off. Her voice was flat, factual. The email notification came through at 11:42 p.m. Statistically unusual. You only take time off when forced. Jack closed his laptop. We're going to Tennessee. Your great-grandmother left you some land. Lily's fingers paused on the cube for just a fraction of a second. The one you said was crazy. Jack felt something twist in his chest. Yeah, turns out I might have been wrong. Lily resumed solving the cube, her fingers moving in patterns that looked random but weren't. Is this about Mom? The question hung in the air between them. Jack had never lied to his daughter, and he wasn't going to start now, even when the truth was something he barely understood himself. Yes, Lily nodded once, processing. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Pack for 2 weeks. Bring your laptop. Lily turned back toward her room, then paused at the threshold. Dad, the probability of this being safe is low, you know that. I know. She stood there another moment, working the cube, thinking. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, Good. Safe is boring, and Mom wouldn't have wanted us to be boring. She disappeared into her room before Jack could respond. He sat alone at the table, staring at the thumb drive, feeling the weight of a decision that had already been made the moment he'd opened that FedEx envelope. They packed that night. Jack's gear was easy. Clothes, boots, basic camping equipment, and the things he never traveled without. A Sig Sauer P320 9mm in a lockbox. His old Marine Corps ruck with the medical kit and the tools that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Night vision monocular, tactical flashlight, knife. The equipment of a man who'd learned that the world was hostile and preparation was the only prayer that got answered. Lily packed her laptop, 3 changes of identical clothes, 17 books on subjects ranging from quantum physics to medieval history, and her Rubik's Cube. Everything fit in a single backpack. They left Sun Valley at dawn. Jack's Ram truck pointed east with 2,000 miles of highway between them and Answers. They drove in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them over 3 years of shared grief. Lily watched the landscape scroll past her window, occasionally commenting on geological formations or calculating their fuel efficiency or asking questions about cloud patterns that Jack couldn't answer. He drove and thought about Ruth's warning and Sarah's death and the growing certainty that he was driving his daughter into danger. But he kept driving, because the alternative was living the rest of his life wondering if he could have done something. If he could have made Sarah's death mean something. If he could have given Lily the truth instead of the comfortable lie that her mother had simply been unlucky. They crossed Idaho into Wyoming, the mountains giving way to high plains that stretched forever under a sky too big to comprehend. They spent the first night in a motel outside Cheyenne, ate diner food that tasted like cardboard, and slept in separate beds with the television murmuring news about fires and floods and the everyday disasters that filled the spaces between commercials. The second day took them through Nebraska and Iowa, flat country that made Jack feel exposed and vulnerable after years in the mountains. Lily read and worked on her laptop and occasionally solved the Rubik's Cube in under 30 seconds just to prove she still could. The third day brought them into Tennessee. The landscape changed gradually, flat fields giving way to rolling hills that deepened into something older and more permanent. The Smoky Mountains rose in the distance, blue-green and heavy with forest, looking exactly the way they had in Jack's memory. He'd been here once, for the wedding Sarah's parents had insisted on holding in the mountains where she'd grown up. Ruth had attended, sat in the front row, and said nothing when the minister asked if anyone objected. But her silence had been louder than words. They reached Gatlinburg in late afternoon, the town half empty in the off-season. Tourist shops were shuttered, the streets quiet. Jack stopped at a gas station, filled the tank, bought coffee and sandwiches that neither of them wanted, but both needed. The GPS coordinates Ruth had provided led them out of town and up a gravel road that climbed steadily into thick forest. Blackwood Ridge Road. The name was hand-painted on a weathered sign that looked like it had been there since before Jack was born. The road narrowed, trees pressing close on both sides, branches scraping the truck's paint. Lily spoke for the first time in an hour. Mom talked about this place once. She said the mountains remember things people want to forget. Jack glanced at her. When did she say that? After the funeral. When she came back. She was different, quieter. Like she was thinking about something she couldn't figure out how to explain. They drove in silence the last mile, the road climbing steeper, the forest growing darker despite the late afternoon sun. Then the trees opened up and the cabin appeared. Jack stopped the truck, engine idling, and stared. It wasn't falling down. The roof looked new, dark shingles that couldn't be more than a few years old. The windows were covered with plywood, but the boards were fitted professionally, not slapped up by someone in a hurry. The porch sagged, but the foundation looked solid. Someone had been maintaining this place, exactly like Ruth had said. Jack killed the engine. The silence of the forest rushed in to fill the space, broken only by wind in the high branches and the distant call of a bird he didn't recognize. He reached for the door handle, then stopped. His Marine training was screaming at him. This was an approach to a potentially hostile structure. He needed to treat it like one. Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. If anything happens, you drive back to town and call the police. Understand? Lily looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. You think someone's watching? I think it's possible. So we're careful. Jack pulled the cig from the lockbox, checked the magazine, chambered around. Lily watched without comment. She'd grown up around firearms, knew how to handle them safely, understood that in her father's world, tools were tools, and you used the right one for the job. He approached the cabin the way he'd approached 100 structures in Kandahar and Helmand province. Slow, alert, weapon ready but not pointed, scanning windows, doorways, the tree line beyond, looking for the things that didn't belong. The shifted shadow, the unnatural stillness, the feeling that comes right before bullets start flying. Nothing moved except wind and leaves. The front door had a new deadbolt, but when Jack tried the handle, it turned. Unlocked, which meant either someone had been here recently or whoever was maintaining the place hadn't bothered to secure it. He pushed the door open with his foot, staying to the side in case someone inside decided to shoot through it. The interior was dark, the boarded windows letting in only thin strips of light. Jack pulled his tactical flashlight, swept the room. Old furniture covered in dust sheets, a cast iron stove in the corner, bookshelves along one wall. Everything neat, preserved, like a museum exhibit of a life that had ended. But there were signs that someone had been here, recent signs. The dust wasn't thick enough for 2 years of abandonment. The air didn't have the stale smell of a sealed building. And there, in the thin layer of dust on the floor, boot prints. Size 12, good tread, leading from the door to the kitchen, the bedroom, the back hallway. Someone had searched this place, not torn it apart, but methodically gone through every room, looking for something. The evidence Ruth had mentioned, probably, which meant Apex knew about it, or suspected, and they'd been searching while Ruth was alive or just after she died. Jack cleared the rest of the cabin room by room. Kitchen with a hand pump that actually worked when he tested it. Bedroom with an iron bed frame and a quilt that looked handmade. Bathroom with a composted toilet and no running water. The whole structure was a time capsule from the 1980s, preserved by someone who'd had no reason to modernize, and no money to do it even if the reason existed. In the living room, he found the smoke detector Ruth had mentioned in her video. He climbed on a chair, examined it. The LED light blinked once every 10 seconds. Active, which meant either it was actually functional or it was a camera. Jack left it alone. If they were watching, let them watch him arrive. Let them think he was just a grieving son-in-law claiming an inheritance. He went back outside, signaled to Lily that it was clear. She emerged from the truck carrying her backpack in the Rubik's Cube, moving with the careful precision of someone navigating a world that didn't quite make sense to her. Inside, with the door closed and his flashlight providing the only illumination, Jack found the loose floorboard Ruth had described, northwest corner, 3 boards from the wall. He pried it up with his knife. Underneath was a metal ammo box, military surplus, the kind that kept moisture out and contents safe. He opened it. Inside were 3 core samples wrapped in canvas, heavy in his hand and warm to the touch in a way that seemed impossible. A folded geological survey map marked with drilling sites, GPS coordinates written in Ruth's cramped handwriting, and a letter. Jack read it by flashlight while Lily stood guard at the window watching the forest. The letter confirmed everything Ruth had said in the video and added details that made Jack's blood run cold. Sarah had called Ruth 2 weeks before her death. They'd talked for over an hour. Sarah had asked about the core samples, the drilling sites, the evidence. Ruth had warned her to be careful. Sarah had said she would be. Then 3 days later, Sarah had driven to Montana alone, told Jack she was visiting an old nursing school friend. She'd driven a route that took her through mountain passes and along roads with steep drop-offs. The Montana Highway Patrol found her car at the bottom of a ravine 2 days later. Single vehicle accident, lost control on a curve, no witnesses. At the bottom of Ruth's letter, a final paragraph. Jack, I know you want to believe it was an accident. Grief is easier than rage. But Sarah deserves better than comfortable lies. She died because she asked questions. Make sure her questions get answered. Make sure Lily knows her mother died for truth, not bad luck. The mountains remember. Make sure people remember too. Jack folded the letter carefully, put it back in the ammo box with the samples and the map. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the kind of anger that burns cold and builds slowly and doesn't go away until it finds an outlet. Lily's voice cut through his thoughts. Dad, there's wood for the stove, stacked outside, recently split. Cuts are fresh. Jack joined her at the window. She was right. A cord of split firewood sat beside the cabin, the cuts pale and clean, maybe a few weeks old at most. Someone was maintaining this property. Someone local, probably. Someone Ruth had trusted or paid to keep the place from falling apart. They built a fire in the stove. The chimney drew well, smoke rising clean. Heat began seeping into the cold room. Jack found candles in the kitchen, the kind that lasted for hours. He lit 3 of them, placed them around the room. In the flickering light, the cabin transformed from a museum into something that felt almost lived in. Lily pulled the sleeping bags from Jack's ruck, spread them near the stove. She sat cross-legged, working the Rubik's Cube, her face expressionless, but her fingers moving with the kind of focused intensity that meant she was thinking hard. Are we in danger? Jack had promised himself he wouldn't lie to her. Yes. From the mining company. Yes. Because of what Grandma Ruth hid. Yes. Lily solved the cube, scrambled it, started again. And Mom, she found out about it. That's why she died. Jack felt his throat close. That's what Ruth believed. What I'm starting to believe. Lily nodded once, processing information the way she processed everything, sorting it into categories and patterns and probabilities. Statistical likelihood of us surviving this is below 50% if we proceed. Probably. She looked at him then, actually made eye contact for 3 full seconds, which for Lily was the equivalent of someone else grabbing his shoulders and shaking him. But Mom would want us to proceed anyway. Jack felt something break open in his chest. Yes, she would. Then we proceed. Lily returned her attention to the cube. I'll need the laptop charged. If we're gathering evidence, we'll need to create distributed backups, multiple cloud storage accounts, delayed email protocols, make the data impossible to destroy. Where did you learn that? Online course in forensic digital security. Got bored last summer. Jack stared at his daughter, this 16-year-old girl who'd taught herself advanced mathematics and computer science, and apparently covert information warfare, while he'd been running from his grief by running into fires. She was Sarah's daughter in every way that mattered. Smart, brave, unwilling to accept comfortable lies when hard truths were available. We'll charge it tomorrow. Tonight we rest. But sleep didn't come easy. Jack lay in his sleeping bag near the dying fire, listening to Lily's breathing, slow and deepen, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. Somewhere in the forest outside, an owl called. Wind moved through the trees. Normal sounds, but every creak of the cabin's frame made his hand move toward the cig lying next to his head. Midnight came and went. Jack's watch read 12:47 when he heard it. Something large moving through the brush outside. Not trying to be quiet, but not making unnecessary noise either. The measured movement of something that belonged here and knew it. He was on his feet with the weapon in his hand before he'd consciously decided to move. At the window, he eased the plywood aside just enough to see out. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows. And standing 30 feet from the cabin, illuminated in silver light, was a horse. Not just any horse. A white horse, coat like fresh snow, standing perfectly still and staring directly at the window where Jack watched. The horse was old. Jack could see it in the sway of the back, the prominent ribs, the way it stood with one hip cocked to rest a leg that probably ached. But the eyes were bright and alert and fixed on Jack with an intelligence that seemed impossible. Ghost. Jack's mouth formed the word without sound. Ruth's video had warned him, the first night you'll see Ghost. Follow him. Don't be afraid, he's family. But this was impossible. Horses didn't live this long in the wild. Didn't appear at midnight on the exact first night someone arrived at a cabin they'd never visited. Didn't look at you with eyes that seemed to understand everything you'd ever lost. Jack eased the door open. The cold night air hit his face, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke and something else. Wild and clean. The horse didn't move, just stood there, watching, waiting. Jack stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight. The horse's ears flicked forward. Then slowly, deliberately, the animal turned its head toward the east, toward the coordinates Ruth had written down, toward wherever the stone building waited with its cargo of evidence and truth. The horse looked back at Jack. The message was clear as speech. Follow me. Every rational part of Jack's brain screamed that this was insane. Horses didn't lead people to evidence. Dead women didn't leave instructions to follow ghost animals. None of this made sense. But then Sarah's death hadn't made sense either. And sometimes the only way through impossible circumstances was to accept that the rules you'd relied on no longer applied. Jack went back inside, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake Lily. He pulled on his jacket, checked the cig, grabbed his night vision monocular and the tactical flashlight. Left a note on the table in case Lily woke up. Gone to check the property. Back by dawn. Stay inside. If I'm not back by 7 a.m., drive to town and call the police. He stepped back outside. The horse was still there, waiting with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. Jack closed the door behind him, locked it with the key that had been in the envelope from the lawyer. Then he followed a ghost into the darkness, trusting Ruth's final message and his own desperate need for answers to guide him through whatever came next. The mountains rose around them, black shapes against a slightly less black sky. The forest was quiet except for the sound of his boots on leaves and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves ahead of him. Jack had been in hostile territory before, had moved through darkness in places where every shadow might hide someone waiting to kill him. This felt different, not safer, just different, like the danger here followed different rules. The horse moved with certainty through terrain that would have been treacherous in daylight and was nearly impossible at night. But Jack's night vision monocular turned the darkness into shades of green, and the horse seemed to glow in the ambient light, a white beacon leading him deeper into the forest and closer to answers that might get him killed. Somewhere ahead, the stone building waited, and with it, evidence of a crime 35 years old and a murder 3 years fresh. Jack followed Ghost into the night, carrying his dead wife's questions and his daughter's faith and Ruth Blackwood's final command. The mountains remembered. Now it was time to make sure everyone else remembered too. Ghost moved through the forest like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance through terrain that would have stopped a man cold. Jack followed 20 feet behind, his night vision monocular transforming the darkness into a landscape of green shadows and phosphorescent highlights. The trees rose around them like cathedral pillars, their bare branches reaching toward a sky occluded by clouds that had moved in after moonset. The temperature had dropped into the 30s, cold enough that Jack's breath came out in clouds that the monocular registered as bright plumes of heat. They climbed steadily for the first 20 minutes, the elevation gain burning in Jack's calves despite 20 years of mountain work. The horse never slowed, never hesitated, moving with the confidence of an animal that Erwin had walked this path 1,000 times. Jack cataloged landmarks as they went, the way he'd been trained to do in hostile territory. A lightning-struck oak split down the middle, a boulder the size of a pickup truck that had tumbled down from higher up the mountain and come to rest against 3 smaller trees. A creek bed, dry now but clearly active during spring runoff, cutting a diagonal slash across their path. His military training kept running scenarios in the background of his mind. If this was an ambush, the ideal location would be the ridgeline ahead, where the trees thinned and anyone approaching would be silhouetted against the sky. If someone was watching the stone building, they'd have thermal imaging and night vision at minimum, possibly more sophisticated surveillance. Jack's advantages were limited. Element of surprise if they weren't expecting him tonight. His combat experience. The fact that he had nothing left to lose except Lily, and that made him more dangerous than men who still thought they had futures worth protecting. Ghost stopped at a wooden post so weathered the numbers on the metal tag were barely visible even through the monocular. Cedar Ridge Trail, marker 7. Exactly where Ruth had said. The horse turned left onto a path so faint Jack would have walked past it in daylight without noticing. The undergrowth closed in, branches catching at his jacket, thorns scraping across the night vision device. He had to duck low, almost crawling in places, following the pale shape of Ghost's hindquarters through vegetation that seemed designed to keep humans out. Then the forest opened into a clearing perhaps 30 feet across. In the center stood a structure that predated the cabin by decades, maybe longer. Stone walls built from hand-cut blocks fitted together with mortar that had turned to powder in places, leaving gaps where wind whistled through. The roof was newer, rough-cut timbers supporting sheets of corrugated metal that had rusted to the color of dried blood. A wooden door hung in the entrance, oak planks bound together with hand-forged iron straps. Jack approached slowly, weapon ready, scanning for threats. The clearing was empty except for the building and Ghost, who had stopped at the tree line and now stood perfectly still, watching. Jack circled the structure once, looking for other entrances, windows, any vulnerability an enemy might exploit. There were none. One door, no windows, stone walls 2 feet thick at the base. The kind of building you put up when you wanted something to last for generations. The door should have been locked. Ruth's letter had mentioned she'd hidden the evidence here, which implied security. But when Jack reached for the handle, he saw fresh scratches in the wood around the lock. Pry marks. Tool marks. Someone had forced this door recently, within the last few days, judging by the pale wood exposed where the weather hadn't had time to darken it. His pulse kicked up. If someone had already found the evidence, if the crates were gone, then this entire trip was pointless, and he'd exposed Lily to danger for nothing. But Ruth's letter had said she'd only taken 3 samples because she was being watched. If whoever had broken in recently had found 47 crates, they'd have needed trucks and time to haul them out. The clearing showed no tire tracks, no disturbance of the undergrowth that would indicate heavy equipment. Jack pulled the door open. It swung on hinges that had been oiled recently, moving silent as a whisper. The smell hit him first. Damp stone, rust, and underneath it all, something else. The mineral tang of earth that had been disturbed and sealed away for decades. He swept the interior with his flashlight. The red filter turned everything the color of wine, but it preserved his night vision and wouldn't be visible from more than 50 feet away. The beam caught wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling along 3 walls. Military surplus, the kind the government sold off by the thousands after every war. Each crate was roughly 2 feet square, stamped with faded text that Jack's light revealed as he moved closer. Apex Mining Corporation. Confidential. Geological Survey. The dates range from March 1987 to November 1987. And there weren't 47 crates. Jack counted quickly. 12. 35 were missing. Someone had been here. Recently. They'd taken most of the evidence but left enough behind that Jack's first thought was that it was intentional. A test, maybe. Leave some crates, see if anyone came looking, see who took the bait. But the crates that remained were still sealed. Heavy staples held the lids closed, and when Jack examined them closely, he could see the staples were original, not replacements. Whoever had taken the 35 crates had left these 12 untouched. He pulled his combat knife, pried the staples from the nearest crate. The wood was dry and cracked with age, and the lid came away with a sound like breaking bones. Inside, wrapped in canvas that had gone stiff with time, were cylindrical metal tubes. Core samples. Exactly what Ruth had described. Each tube was perhaps 18 inches long, 2 inches in diameter, surprisingly heavy when Jack lifted one. The metal was warm to the touch despite the cold air, as if whatever was inside generated its own heat. Stamped into the metal cap were numbers and coordinates. Date, 04/22/1987. GPS coordinates in degrees and decimal minutes. Jack pulled out his phone, careful to keep it in airplane mode so it wouldn't ping any cell towers and announce his location. He took photos of the crate, the stamps, the coordinates. Worked quickly through the remaining 11 crates, documenting everything. Each core sample had different coordinates, different dates, but all fell within that same 8-month window in 1987. He pulled 2 samples from different crates, wrapped them in the canvas, stuffed them carefully into his pack. Then he started uploading the photos to encrypted cloud storage through his phone's hotspot. The signal was weak this deep in the mountains, but it connected eventually. 47 photos, each one evidence of illegal drilling, corporate theft, crimes that would cost Apex Mining everything if they became public. The upload bar crept across his screen with agonizing slowness. 40%, 50, 60. Jack kept his attention split between the phone and the clearing outside, watching for movement, listening for the sounds that would indicate he was no longer alone. At 78%, he heard it. A voice, distant but clear in the cold air. Radio chatter, someone speaking in the clipped, professional tones of security contractors coordinating movement. Thermal picked up something at the site, moving to investigate. Jack killed his flashlight, pocketed the phone with the upload still running, and moved to the door. Through the night vision monocular, he could see 2 figures approaching from the north, perhaps 100 yards out. They moved with tactical precision, weapons ready, scanning with what looked like thermal optics mounted on their rifles. Former military, definitely. Probably contractors working private security. Ghost had vanished. One moment the white horse had been standing at the tree line. The next the animal was simply gone, as if it had never existed. Jack was alone with 12 crates of evidence and 2 armed men closing in on his position. His training offered options. He could engage, take them both down before they knew what hit them. At this range, in darkness, with the element of surprise and his combat experience, he'd probably win. But shooting civilian security guards, even ones working for a corrupt corporation, would make him a murderer in the eyes of the law. It would destroy any chance of using this evidence legally. He could run, slip out while they were still distant, use the terrain and darkness to evade. But if they had thermal imaging, they'd track his heat signature through the forest. And running meant leaving the phone behind if the upload didn't finish. Leaving the evidence unprotected. Or he could wait, let them find him, see what they wanted, Keep his weapon ready but not drawn. Sometimes the best way to fight was to let the enemy think they'd won. The upload hit 94%. The men were 50 yards out. Jack could see them clearly now through the monocular, both in their 40s, fit, moving with the kind of confidence that came from extensive training and the certainty that they were the most dangerous things in these woods. They carried AR platform rifles with thermal scopes and infrared illuminators, body armor under their jackets, comms rigs with throat mics. This wasn't rent-a-cop security. This was professional. 100%. Upload complete. Jack pulled the phone, shut down the hotspot, slipped it into his pocket. Then he stepped out of the stone building, empty hands visible, and stood in the clearing waiting for them to arrive. They came in from two directions. Classic flanking maneuver. Rifles up, but not quite pointed at him. The taller one, broad-shouldered with a Marine Corps haircut that had never quite grown out, spoke first. Little late for a nature walk, Jack kept his hands at his sides, relaxed but ready. Could say the same about you. The second man circled to Jack's left, maintaining distance, staying outside arm's reach. Both men were tracking him with the kind of attention that meant they'd done this before and knew how fast things could go sideways. The tall one lowered his rifle slightly, though the barrel still tracked center mass. You got ID? Jack pulled his wallet slowly, tossed it toward the man. Tennessee driver's license. My property. Inherited it 2 days ago. The guard examined the license, handed it back. That checks out. Sorry for the intrusion. We're with Apex Mining Security. We've had some vandalism issues in the area, just making sure everything's secure. At 2 in the morning, in a clearing half a mile from the nearest road. The guard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, like he was recalculating threat assessment and not liking the results. You always explore property in the middle of the night? Marine Corps taught me to move when other people sleep. Makes it easier to see what you're not supposed to see. That got a reaction. The second guard's hand tightened on his rifle. The tall one's eyes narrowed fractionally. You might want to be careful making statements like that, Mr. Mitchell. These mountains can be dangerous at night. So I've heard. My wife died on a mountain road 3 years ago, lost control on a curve. But she was a better driver than that, never made mistakes. The silence that followed was the kind that contains entire conversations. The tall guard knew something. Jack could see it in the micro-expressions that crossed his face before discipline locked everything down. Recognition, maybe guilt, maybe just the acknowledgement that this conversation had moved into territory where words mattered and wrong answers could have consequences. The guard lowered his rifle completely. I'm sorry for your loss, but you should head back to the cabin. Get some rest. This area isn't safe for civilians after dark. Jack held his ground. What makes it unsafe? Wildlife, terrain, the kind of accidents that happen when people go places they shouldn't, like my wife's accident. The guard's face went carefully blank. I don't know anything about that. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to finish our patrol. They backed away, maintaining sight lines, keeping Jack covered until they disappeared into the forest. Their radio chatter faded into the distance. Jack stood alone in the clearing, his heart rate finally beginning to slow, adrenaline burning through his system in a way that felt familiar and almost comforting. He'd just been warned, politely, professionally, but the message was clear. Leave, or what happened to Sarah could happen to him. He checked his phone. The photos were safely uploaded to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. The core samples were in his pack. He'd gotten what he came for. Now he needed to get back to Lily before those guards decided to check the cabin and found a 16-year-old girl alone. The walk back was faster, fueled by urgency and the kind of fear that has nothing to do with personal safety and everything to do with the safety of the one person in the world who mattered. Jack moved quickly, using the GPS coordinates on his phone to navigate, not bothering with stealth now that he'd already been spotted. The guards knew he was here. They'd report it. Whoever ran security for Apex would make decisions about what to do next. The cabin appeared through the trees like a memory of shelter. Dark, silent. Jack approached carefully, scanning for vehicles, additional guards, any sign that someone had been here while he was gone. Nothing. The door was still locked. He let himself in quietly. Lily was not in her sleeping bag. Panic hit like a fist to the chest. Jack swept the cabin with his flashlight, checking the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. Empty. All empty. Her backpack was still here. Her laptop. Everything except Lily herself. Then he saw it. The bedroom window, the one he'd checked before leaving, was open 6 inches. Fresh air moving the thin curtains. And on the windowsill, carefully placed where he'd see it, was her Rubik's Cube. Lily never left the cube behind. Never. It was her anchor, her comfort object. The thing she held when the world became too chaotic to process. Finding it here, deliberately placed, was a message. She'd gone somewhere on purpose. And she'd left the cube to tell him she'd be back. Jack's flashlight caught something else. Small footprints in the thin dust on the floor. Lily's size, leading from her sleeping bag to the window to the back door. She'd left the cabin. But why? And where? He found the answer on the kitchen table. A note in Lily's precise handwriting. Dad, I heard you leave at 12:52 a.m. Calculated 87% probability you went to find the evidence Ruth mentioned. Tracked your phone's GPS ping when it connected for the upload. Followed your route. Please don't be angry. Together is statistically safer than separated. I'm at the coordinates. Lily. Jack stared at the note, feeling equal parts terror and pride. His daughter had tracked him using GPS, followed him through hostile forest in the middle of the night, and was currently sitting at a location where armed guards had just threatened him. And her last line was, please don't be angry, as if his anger was the primary concern rather than the fact that she could be killed. He was already moving, grabbing his pack, checking his weapon. The night vision monocular went around his neck, extra magazine in his pocket. Every second counted now. If those guards came back and found Lily alone at the stone building, if they decided she was a threat, or a liability, or simply leverage to use against him, every nightmare scenario Jack had ever imagined would become real. The run back to the clearing took 15 minutes of pushing through undergrowth that tore at his clothes and left scratches across his face. His lungs burned, his legs felt like concrete, but the fear of finding Lily hurt or taken or worse pushed him beyond what his body wanted to quit. He burst into the clearing at full sprint and stopped. Lily stood in the doorway of the stone building, alive, unhurt. And 10 feet in front of her, hands visible and empty, stood a man Jack didn't recognize. 50s, weathered face, the build of someone who'd done manual labor his entire life. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt and boots caked with dried mud. Not dressed like security, not moving like a threat, just standing there, talking to Lily in a voice too quiet for Jack to hear from this distance. Jack drew the cig, advanced into the clearing with the weapon raised. Step away from my daughter. The man turned slowly, saw the gun, and raised his hands without panic or surprise. Easy, Mitchell. I'm not here to hurt anyone, just doing my job. Jack moved between the man and Lily, keeping the weapon centered on the stranger's chest. Lily, get behind me. But Lily didn't move. Her voice came from behind him, calm and factual. Dad, he says his name is Douglas Kane. He's been watching the property. He knew Mom. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Douglas Kane. Ruth's letter had mentioned that name. The man Apex hired to make problems disappear. The man who'd been following Sarah before she died. Jack's finger moved to the trigger guard. You killed my wife. Kane's face showed something that might have been regret. Not the way you think. I didn't run her off the road. Didn't tamper with her car. I was just supposed to watch her, report what she did, where she went, who she talked to. Just following orders. Kane's jaw tightened. Yeah, and I've regretted it every day since. She was a good person, asking the wrong questions, but good. Lily spoke again, still not moving from the doorway. He says Apex didn't order her killed. Hayes did. Victor Hayes, their attorney, made the decision without board approval. Kane was told to follow her, nothing more. Jack's hands were shaking now, the cig wavering slightly. How do I know you're not lying? Kane reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Jack tensed, ready to fire. But the man pulled out a phone, pulled up a recording, held it out. You can listen or you can shoot me. Either way, the truth is what it is. Jack took the phone and his free hand, keeping the weapon trained on Kane. Press play. A conversation, recorded voices, the audio quality suggesting it had been captured on a wire. Two men talking, one voice Jack didn't recognize. The other made his blood run cold with rage. We have a problem. Sarah Mitchell found Ruth Blackwood's old court filings. She's been asking questions. The first voice, older, tired. So discredit her. Make her look crazy. Standard procedure. The second voice, smoother, confident. I don't think that'll work. She's persistent, and she started talking to a lawyer in Knoxville. Then make it stop. Permanently. You know what's at stake here. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about protecting 200 million in assets and the careers of everyone in this company. Do what needs to be done. Make it look like an accident. You've done it before. A long silence on the recording. Then the first voice, quiet and defeated. It'll take time to set up. It has to be clean. You have 2 weeks. The recording ended. Jack stared at the phone, his vision tunneling, breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the confirmation of what he'd suspected for 3 years. Sarah had been murdered, deliberately, professionally, by men who discussed it like they were planning a corporate merger. Who's the second voice? Kane took the phone back. Victor Hayes, Apex's general counsel, the man who makes problems disappear. He ordered the hit. I was supposed to just surveil Sarah, but someone else got assigned to the actual work. Professional. Someone with experience making accidents look real. Did you know before it happened? Kane's silence was answer enough. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. One squeeze. That's all it would take. Put a 9mm round through the chest of a man who'd helped kill his wife. Justice delivered at 1,500 feet per second. Lily's voice cut through the red haze in his mind. He recorded the conversation, kept it for 3 years. Could have deleted it. Didn't. That's evidence. We need him alive. Jack's hands shook harder. Every instinct screamed to pull the trigger. Every memory of Sarah demanded it. But Lily was right. Kane alive with evidence was worth more than Kane dead with Jack facing murder charges. He lowered the weapon slowly. Why are you still here? Why not run? Kane met his eyes. Because Ruth Blackwood was right about everything. And I spent 35 years helping bury the truth. Now I want to dig it back up. The night air felt too thin to breathe. Jack holstered the cig, turned to Lily. Why did you come here? I heard you leave. Calculated that if you were gathering evidence, 2 people could cover more ground than one. I was going to help photograph the crates. In the middle of the night, in hostile territory. Lily's expression didn't change. You taught me that the most dangerous thing is being predictable. Everyone expects people to move in daylight, so we move in darkness. Elementary tactics. Jack wanted to scream at her, wanted to lock her in the cabin and never let her out where the world could hurt her. But she was standing here in a clearing at 3 a.m, having tracked him through a forest using GPS coordinates and deductive reasoning, speaking to a man who'd helped kill her mother with the kind of clinical detachment that let her see patterns instead of just pain. She was Sarah's daughter, brilliant and brave and absolutely terrifying in her certainty. He turned back to Kane. The guards who were here earlier, they work for you? Kane shook his head. Different team. Apex brought in outside contractors 2 days ago. They're not local, not invested. They'll do whatever Hayes tells them because that's what they're paid for. How many? 6 that I've seen. Could be more. Armed? Like they're going to war. Kane glanced at the stone building. You got photos of the crates? Uploaded to cloud storage. Multiple accounts. Good. But photos aren't enough. You need testimony, documentation, a paper trail that connects the illegal drilling to current operations. And you need protection because Hayes is going to come at you hard the moment he realizes you're serious. Where do we get that? Kane pulled out a business card, handed it to Jack. Rebecca Park, attorney in Knoxville. She's been trying to build a case against Apex for 15 years. Never had enough evidence. What you've got, combined with what I can provide, might be enough. Why help us? Kane looked away, staring at the forest. Because I'm 62 years old, stage 4 lung cancer, got maybe 6 months, and I'd like to die knowing I did one thing right. Ruth Blackwood spent her whole life fighting these bastards. Died alone and called crazy. Your wife asked questions and got killed for it. Maybe it's time someone actually listened. The silence that followed was broken only by wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl. Jack studied Kane's face, looking for deception, for the angle, for whatever play this was. But all he saw was a tired old man who'd spent his life on the wrong side and wanted to balance the scales before the bill came due. Lily had moved to stand beside Jack, her hands working an invisible Rubik's Cube, processing information. If we contact the attorney tomorrow, probability of Apex learning about it approaches certainty. They'll have someone watching her office, watching us. Kane nodded. That's why you don't go to her office. There's a diner in Knoxville. The Copper Kettle, off Cedar Bluff Road. She eats breakfast there every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Public place. Witnesses. Hard to make you disappear in front of 50 people drinking coffee. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Kane smiled without humor. Convenient, isn't it? Jack looked at his daughter, at this man who'd spent decades working for the enemy, at the stone building full of evidence that could destroy a billion-dollar corporation or get them all killed. Every choice was bad. Every path led to danger. But doing nothing meant Sarah's death stayed classified as an accident, and Lily grew up believing her mother had simply been unlucky. We'll be there. Kane nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. Mitchell, Hayes won't come at you directly. He'll use the law first. Try to get you declared an unfit parent, take Lily into state custody, tie you up in court until you run out of money and hope. If that doesn't work, he'll escalate. Accidents, intimidation, whatever it takes. You need to be ready for all of it. I've been ready for 3 years. Just didn't know what I was ready for. Now you do. Kane walked into the forest, disappearing into darkness like he'd never been there. Jack stood with Lily in the clearing, the stone building behind them, the weight of uploaded evidence and recorded confessions, and a murdered wife pressing down like physical mass. Lily spoke quietly. We should go back to the cabin. You need rest. Big day tomorrow. Jack wanted to laugh at the understatement. Big day. Meeting with a lawyer to accuse a mining corporation of illegal drilling, corporate theft, and murder. Just another Wednesday. But Lily was already walking toward the path, moving with the confidence of someone who'd navigated this forest once and could do it again. The walk back was quiet. Jack's mind ran through scenarios, contingencies, the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. But underneath the tactical planning was something else, something that felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. Purpose. For 3 years he'd been drifting, running from grief by running into fires. Now he had direction, had a mission, had a reason to survive beyond simple inertia. They reached the cabin as the sky began to lighten in the east, that deep blue that comes before dawn. Inside, Lily went straight to her laptop, opened it, started typing. Jack watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, code and commands scrolling past faster than he could follow. What are you doing? Setting up the dead man switch. If we don't deactivate it every 12 hours, all the evidence uploads automatically to FBI, EPA, major news outlets, investigative journalists. Creates distributed copies that can't be deleted. Where did you learn that? Online course. Also, I've been reading about corporate whistleblowing cases. Standard protocol when facing entities with significant resources and no ethical constraints. Jack sat down heavily on his sleeping bag. You've been preparing for this. Lily didn't look up from the screen. Not specifically this, but Mom always said that knowledge is never wasted, that you learn things because you might need them someday. I learned this because it seemed interesting. Now it's useful. The sky outside grew brighter. Jack watched his daughter work. This strange, brilliant girl who processed the world through mathematics and patterns and saw threats as simply probability calculations to be managed. She was 16 years old and building a dead man's switch to protect them from corporate assassins. And she was doing it with the same focused intensity she brought to solving Rubik's cubes. Done. Lily closed the laptop. First deactivation cycle is in 11 hours, 43 minutes. We should sleep. Optimal cognitive function requires minimum 6 hours rest. Jack lay back, closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying Kane's recording. Hayes' voice ordering Sarah's death like he was ordering office supplies. The casual evil of men who killed to protect profit margins and called it business. The rage that burned in his chest was cold and patient and absolutely certain. Lily's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Outside, birds began their morning songs. The forest woke around them, indifferent to human dramas of murder and evidence and corporate corruption. The mountains had seen it all before and would see it all again long after everyone involved was dust. Jack finally drifted into something like sleep, shallow and fitful, full of dreams where Sarah was 11, laughing and then falling, and he could never reach her in time. He woke with sunlight streaming through gaps in the boarded windows, Lily already up and dressed and eating an energy bar with mechanical efficiency. Time to go meet the lawyer. They loaded the truck in silence. Jack did a final sweep of the cabin, making sure they left nothing behind that could be used against them. The core samples went in a lockbox in the truck bed, the laptop in Lily's backpack, Everything else was replaceable. The drive to Knoxville took 90 minutes through mountain roads that twisted and climbed and dropped with the kind of casual danger that made Jack think about Sarah every time they rounded a blind curve. But they made it without incident, rolled into the city as morning traffic was building to its peak. The Copper Kettle Diner sat in a strip mall between a pawn shop and a tax preparation service. The kind of place that served breakfast and all day and had regulars who'd been coming for decades. Jack parked where he could see the entrance, scanned for threats, saw nothing obvious, just people getting coffee and eggs before work. Normal life happening around them while they sat on evidence that could blow apart a corporation. Rebecca Park arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes early. Jack recognized her from the photo on her law firm's website. Korean-American, early 40s, dressed in a gray suit that said professional without trying too hard. She walked into the diner, got a booth by the window, ordered coffee. Jack watched for another 5 minutes, looking for tails, for watchers, for the surveillance that Kane said would be there. He saw nothing, which either meant they were very good or Kane was wrong. Time to find out which. He and Lily crossed to the parking lot, entered the diner, slid into the booth across from Rebecca Park. She looked up from her phone, eyes moving from Jack to Lily and back, assessment happening in real time. Her expression gave nothing away, but Jack could see intelligence working behind those eyes, connecting dots, making decisions. Mr. Mitchell, your message said you have evidence regarding Apex mining operations. Jack pulled out his phone, queued up one of the photos, slid it across the table. Core sample, dated April 1987. GPS coordinates place it 400 feet outside Apex's legal drilling boundary on property owned by Ruth Blackwood. Parks studied the photo for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee, took a sip, and smiled like someone who'd just been dealt a royal flush. Tell me everything. So Jack did. Starting with Ruth's video and ending with Kane's recording, laying out 3 decades of corporate theft and a murder made to look like an accident. Park listened without interrupting, her face giving nothing away, but her coffee went cold and forgotten as the story unfolded. When Jack finished, she sat back in the booth and was quiet for a full minute. Then she pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. Notes in shorthand that filled 2 pages. Finally, she looked up. This is good, better than good. This is the kind of evidence that ends companies. But you need to understand what you're starting. Apex Mining Corporation has a market cap of $4.8 billion. Their Tennessee lithium operation generates over $600 million in annual revenue, all of it built on reserves they stole from your wife's grandmother. When this goes public, they lose everything. Good. Park's expression hardened, which means they'll fight with everything they have. Legal, illegal, whatever it takes, they'll come after your fitness as a parent, your mental state, your military record, looking for anything to discredit you before you can testify. Her eyes moved to Lily, and they'll use your daughter. Questions about her care, her education, whether she's being exploited or endangered. They'll make you defend every choice you've made since Sarah died. Jack felt rage building again, but Lily spoke before he could. Expected outcome. Standard corporate defense strategy when facing a whistleblower with strong evidence. Probability of success for them is low if we're prepared, which we are. Park smiled for the first time. Smart kid. You're right. If we're prepared, if we document everything, if we make the evidence so public they can't bury it, they can't win. But it won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is. Park's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, showed the screen to Jack. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Tell Mitchell he has 24 hours. Take the settlement or face consequences. $3 million. Final offer. They're watching. Park looked around the diner, scanning faces, looking for whoever had sent that text. Everyone looks normal, which means they're very good or very connected. Probably both. She put the phone down, met Jack's eyes. What do you want to do? Jack thought about Sarah, about Ruth dying alone and called crazy, about Lily growing up believing her mother's death was random bad luck instead of murder, about 3 years of running from grief instead of facing the people who'd caused it. I want to fight. Then we fight. Park pulled out a contract, slid it across the table. I work on contingency. 33% if we win or settle. Nothing if we lose. But understand this. We're about to go to war with people who have unlimited resources and no conscience. They will come at us with everything, and some of us might not survive. Jack signed without hesitation. Lily added her signature below his, the handwriting precise and controlled. Park countersign, tucked the contract into her briefcase. First step is getting the core samples authenticated. I know a geologist at University of Tennessee who can verify their content and origin. Then we file a formal complaint with the State Mining Board. Force Apex to respond on the record. Make them lie under oath or admit the truth. Either way, got him. How long? If we move fast, 3 weeks to preliminary hearing. But Jack, you and Lily can't stay at that cabin. It's not safe. I have a client who owns a rental property outside the city. Secure, private. You can stay there while we build the case. Jack shook his head. We stay at the cabin. Let them watch. Let them know we're not afraid. And if they come at us, let them do it where the mountains can remember what happened. Park studied him for a long moment. Marine Corps? Force Recon. 2 tours. I know how to handle myself. Handling yourself and protecting your daughter are different things. Lily spoke up, her voice calm and certain. Statistical analysis suggests staying mobile and unpredictable is safer than staying in a single location they control. The cabin is ours. We know the terrain. They don't. Tactical advantage is ours. Park looked at this 16-year-old girl talking about tactical advantages and terrain control like she was briefing a military operation. Then she looked at Jack and saw the same certainty reflected back. All right, we do this your way, but you check in every 12 hours. Miss a check-in, I call the FBI and state police. Understood? Understood. They left the diner separately. Park first, then Jack and Lily 5 minutes later. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Jack watched the mirrors, looking for tails, seeing nothing. But Kane's warning echoed in his mind. Hayes won't come at you directly. He'll use the law first. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it. No signs of intrusion, no watchers visible in the forest. But Jack's instincts screamed that they weren't alone, that somewhere in those trees someone was watching, reporting, waiting for orders. That night, as Lily slept and Jack kept watch, he thought about the path they'd started down. There was no turning back now. The evidence was uploaded, distributed, beyond anyone's ability to destroy. The lawyer was building a case. The dead man's switch was running its countdown. In 24 hours, Hayes's deadline would expire, and whatever came next, Jack would be ready. For Sarah, for Ruth, for Lily, for the truth that the mountains remembered and men tried to forget. The night deepened, the forest breathed, and somewhere in that darkness, Ghost walked unseen, watching over the living and the dead with eyes that knew secrets the mountains kept. The deadline came and went like smoke through fingers. 24 hours after Rebecca Park signed the contract, Hayes's $3 million offer expired with no response from Jack except silence. That silence was its own answer, and Jack knew it would be interpreted correctly by men who spoke the language of leverage and threat. He'd chosen war over peace, truth over money, and now both sides would have to live with the consequences. The cabin felt different on the second night. Not physically changed, but weighted with awareness. Jack sat in the wooden chair Ruth had probably occupied for 30 years, cleaning the cig with the kind of methodical attention that kept his hands busy while his mind worked through scenarios. Lily was at the fold-down table, her laptop open, fingers moving across keys in patterns that looked like music but were actually code. She'd spent the afternoon building additional layers of protection, distributing the evidence across servers in 7 countries, creating redundancies that would make the information impossible to erase, even if someone managed to breach one system. The fire in the cast iron stove burned low, just enough heat to keep the November cold at bay. Outside, the forest had gone quiet in that way that meant something was watching. Not the normal quiet of night settling in, but the anticipatory hush that precedes violence. Jack had felt it in Kandahar before ambushes, that prickling certainty that the enemy was close and waiting for the right moment. His phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca Park. Geologists confirm samples are authentic. Spodumene ore, lithium bearing, dates and coordinates match your photos exactly. Filing state complaint tomorrow morning. This becomes public record. No going back. Jack typed his response. Good. Let them come. But they didn't come that night, or the next day, or the day after that. The waiting was worse than action. Jack knew that was the point. Let the targets sweat. Let them wonder when the hammer would fall. Let anxiety do the work fear couldn't accomplish. It was psychological warfare, and it would have worked on someone who had something left to lose. 3 days after the deadline expired, a silver Lexus SUV climbed into Blackwood Ridge Road and parked in front of the cabin. One man emerged alone, hands visible and empty. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with silver hair cut military short and a face that had spent time in the sun. Late 60s, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints didn't quite work the way they used to, but whose mind was sharp as ever. He wore jeans and a canvas jacket and boots that had walked through worse places than Tennessee forests. Jack watched from the window, the cig within reach but not drawn. The man stopped 20 feet from the cabin, stood with his hands at his sides, and waited. Not threatening, just present, patient in the way that comes from knowing how to wait. Lily appeared at Jack's shoulder, her voice quiet. He's been standing there for 7 minutes. Heart rate appears steady, breathing regular, not displaying signs of immediate threat, but his stance suggests military training, probably Marine Corps based on the way he distributes his weight. How can you tell that from here? Posture analysis, body mechanics, it's pattern recognition. Jack opened the door, stepped onto the porch with the cig in a low-ready position. The man didn't react to the weapon, just met Jack's eyes and held the gaze without challenge or submission. Jack Mitchell. The voice was gravel over sandpaper, rough with age and what sounded like a lifetime of cigarettes. I need to talk to you 5 minutes. Then I'll leave if you want. Who are you? The man's jaw worked like he was chewing words before spitting them out. Name's Frank Morrison. I worked for Apex Mining for 35 years. Drill technician. I'm the one who pulled those core samples you found. The name hit Jack like a fist. Morrison. The man Ruth had mentioned in her letter. The one who'd kept records when he was told to destroy them. The one who'd shown up at Rebecca Park's office with a ledger that documented every illegal drilling operation Apex had conducted in 1987. Jack lowered the weapon slightly. You're the whistleblower. Morrison's laugh was bitter. 35 years too late. But yeah, that's me. Why are you here? Because there's something you need to know before this goes any further. Something about who you are and why Ruth left that property to your daughter instead of you. Jack felt cold spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the November air. What are you talking about? Morrison looked past Jack toward the cabin, toward Lily standing in the doorway watching with those dark eyes that missed nothing. Can we talk inside? This isn't the kind of conversation you have in a yard where anyone could be listening. Jack studied the old man's face, looking for deception, for the angle, for whatever play this was. But all he saw was exhaustion and something that looked like regret, worn so deep it had become part of the bone structure. You carrying any weapons? Morrison opened his jacket slowly, turned in a circle. Nothing. I'm 72 years old with stage 4 lung cancer. I'm not here to fight. Just to tell you the truth before I run out of time to tell it. Jack stepped aside and let Morrison enter. Lily moved to her laptop, fingers already typing, probably recording audio, video, every word that was about to be said. Morrison noticed and nodded approval. Smart girl. Document everything. That's how you survive what's coming. He sat in the chair opposite Jack, moved like sitting hurt, like everything hurt. His hands were gnarled with arthritis, the fingers bent at angles that spoke of decades gripping tools in cold weather. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. I met your mother in 1971. I was 20 years old, working construction in Knoxville. She was 19. We got married 6 months later, because that's what you did back then, when you got a girl pregnant. You were born in March of 1972. The words landed in the space between them, like stones dropped in deep water. Jack's breath stopped somewhere between inhale and exhale. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just his sense of reality shifting under the weight of what he'd just heard. You're lying. Morrison pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket, set it on the table between them. A young woman holding a baby, standing next to a man who looked like a younger, healthier version of the person sitting across from Jack now. The woman had Jack's eyes. The baby had Morrison's nose. Your mother's name was Elizabeth Morrison. We were married for 2 years. Then I started drinking, started hitting her, started being the kind of man who deserved to lose everything. She left when you were 18 months old, took you to California, changed her name back to her maiden name, Chen. I signed away parental rights because I knew I just hurt you both more if I stayed. Jack stared at the photograph, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. His mother had died when he was 8. Cancer. He had vague memories of her, soft-edged and incomplete. She'd never mentioned a father, never explained why it was just the two of them. Jack had assumed the man was dead or gone or simply uninterested. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Ruth Blackwood knew. Your mother and Ruth were friends. When Elizabeth got sick, when she knew she was dying, she asked Ruth to watch over you. Make sure you didn't end up like me. Ruth kept track of you your whole life, through foster care, through the Marines, through everything. When you married Sarah, Ruth didn't disapprove because you weren't good enough. She disapproved because she knew exactly who you were and what you came from." Jack's hands had formed fists without him noticing. His whole body was rigid with the kind of tension that precedes either violence or collapse. "You're telling me Ruth was protecting Sarah from me?" Morrison shook his head. "She was protecting you from yourself, from the anger you inherited, from becoming what I was. But then she watched you for 20 years and saw you were different, saw you were the man I should have been. That's why she left the property to Lily through your control, because she knew you'd fight for it, knew you'd finish what she started." Lily's voice cut through the silence, clinical and precise. "Genetic predisposition to alcoholism and violent behavior has correlation but not causation. Dad has neither condition. Statistical probability of him replicating your patterns is less than 15%. Morrison looked at her and something like pride crossed his face. "You got Sarah's brains and Jack's stubbornness. That's a dangerous combination for Apex to face." Jack found his voice, rough and uncertain. "Does Park know about this?" "Not yet, but she will. Apex's lawyers will dig into your background. They'll find the adoption records, the name change, everything. They'll connect you to me, then they'll use it, paint you as the son of an abusive drunk, question your fitness as a parent, make the jury wonder if violence runs in your blood. So you came here to what? Warn me?" Morrison met his eyes and Jack saw something familiar there. The look of a man who'd spent decades running from mistakes and finally decided to turn around and face them. "I came here to testify, to stand up in court and tell them, yes, I'm his father. Yes, I was a piece of shit. But my son is nothing like me. He's the man I should have been. And I'm going to help him destroy the company I spent 35 years serving because it's the only decent thing I've done in 72 years of living." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of fire in the stove and the soft click of Lily's fingers on the keyboard. Jack stood, walked to the window, stared out at the forest. His whole sense of identity was fragmenting. The story he'd told himself about who he was and where he came from had just been revealed as incomplete at best, fiction at worst. Behind him, Morrison continued speaking. "I kept those records because I knew what we were doing was wrong. Every time I pulled a core sample from Ruth's land, every time I logged in coordinates that fell outside our lease, I knew. But I needed the job, had bills, had a drinking problem that took every dollar I earned. So I did what I was told, hated myself a little more each day. When Ruth came to the drilling site, when she demanded to know what we were doing, I was the one who called security. I'm the reason they ran her off. I'm the reason everyone thought she was crazy. I could have backed her up, could have told the truth, but I was afraid of losing my paycheck." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that suggested his lungs were losing the battle cancer had started. "When your mother told me about you, years later, told me you joined the Marines and made something of yourself, I was proud. Didn't have any right to be, but I was. And when Sarah died, when I heard about it through Ruth, I knew it wasn't an accident. Knew it was Apex cleaning up loose ends the way they always did." Jack turned back to face Morrison. "You have proof they killed her?" "Not direct proof, but I know how they work. Know who they use when problems need to disappear. Douglas Kane was their fixer for decades. If Sarah got too close to the truth, Kane would have been assigned to handle it. Kane says he just surveilled her, says Hayes ordered the hit, but someone else executed it." Morrison nodded. "That's probably true. Kane's good at a lot of things, but murder's not his specialty. Hayes would have brought in outside talent, someone professional, someone without connections to Apex that could be traced. So we'll never know who actually did it. Maybe not, but we know who ordered it, and we can prove the motive. That's enough for justice, even if it's not enough for revenge." Jack sat back down, feeling older than his 52 years. The weight of the last 3 days, The last 3 years, the revelation about Morrison, all of it pressed down like physical mass. Lily appeared at his shoulder, her hand resting briefly on his arm. The touch was awkward, uncomfortable for her, but deliberate. Her way of offering comfort in a situation where words failed. Does it change anything? Her voice was matter of fact. Biologically, he's your father. Functionally, he wasn't. Your identity is built on your choices, not your genetics. You're still you. Jack looked at his daughter, this brilliant, strange girl who saw the world through mathematics and logic and somehow cut through emotional complexity to bedrock truth. She was right. Finding out Frank Morrison was his biological father didn't change who Jack had become, didn't erase the choices he'd made or the man he'd built himself into. He turned back to Morrison. You said you want to testify. What exactly can you offer? Morrison pulled out the same battered ledger he'd brought to Rebecca Park's office. 35 years of drilling logs. Every hole we drilled, every sample we pulled, every coordinate we recorded. Cross-referenced with Apex's official records, you can see exactly where they lied. Where they operated outside their lease, where they stole from Ruth and every other property owner in this valley. Plus, I can testify to the culture of the company, the pressure to produce results regardless of legality, the orders to destroy evidence, the threats against anyone who talked. I was there. I saw it. And I kept notes because some part of me knew that eventually the bill would come due. Park will want this. She already has a copy. I gave it to her 2 days ago. But I wanted you to hear it from me first, before you found out in court or read it in a deposition. You deserve to know who I am and what I did. Jack studied the old man's face, seeing his own features reflected there like a ghost image. The shape of the jaw, the way the eyes sat in the skull, genetics announcing themselves in bone structure and muscle placement. He should feel something, anger maybe, or the grief of missed opportunity, but all he felt was tired. Why now? Why not 30 years ago when it might have mattered? Morrison's expression hardened. Because 30 years ago I was still drinking, still making excuses, still telling myself I was just following orders and it wasn't my fault. I quit drinking 20 years ago, got sober, got my life as together as it was ever going to get, but I never found the courage to face what I'd done. Then Ruth died, then Sarah died, then you showed up with Lily and I realized this was my last chance. Cancer's eating my lungs. I've got maybe 4 months before I'm drowning in fluid and begging for morphine. I can spend that time in regret, or I can spend it doing something that matters. What about Apex? They'll come after you. Morrison's laugh was dark. I'm a dead man already. What are they going to do, kill me faster? Let them try. I've spent my whole life being afraid. I'm done with that. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. Jack fed it more wood, watched flames catch and spread, thought about fathers and sons and the ways violence passed through generations until someone had the strength to break the chain. He'd spent his adult life trying to be nothing like the father he'd never known. Now he discovered he'd succeeded without realizing the man existed. Lily had returned to her laptop, but she was listening, processing, building a new framework for understanding family that included a grandfather who'd abandoned his son, but was now trying to make amends. Her fingers moved across the keys, and Jack knew she was probably researching Morrison, cross-checking facts, verifying everything. After a moment, she spoke without looking up. Probability that Apex already knows about your relationship is 97%. They'll have investigated everyone connected to this case. Birth records are public. They know. Morrison nodded, which means they're already planning how to use it. Paint Jack as the son of a drunk who's only testifying to get revenge on the company that fired him. Make it look like family grudge instead of legitimate whistleblowing. Will that work? Not if we get ahead of it. Not if we control the narrative. Park's already building a strategy. We acknowledge the relationship up front. Own it. Turn it into a strength instead of a vulnerability. He stood slowly, joints protesting. I should go. You've got a lot to process, but Jack, for what it's worth, I'm proud of the man you became. Your mother would be too. Jack walked him to the door, stood on the porch watching Morrison climb into the Lexus. The old man paused before getting in, looked back at the cabin one more time. Then he drove away, taillights disappearing down the ridge road into gathering darkness. Inside, Lily had closed her laptop and was working the Rubik's Cube, her thinking tool. She spoke without looking at Jack. Does this change our plan? No. Does it change how you feel about the case? No. Does it change anything? Jack thought about that, about identity and legacy, and the choices that defined who you became, about Sarah and Ruth and the weight of secrets kept and revealed, about Lily growing up knowing that genetics were just starting conditions, not destinations. It changes nothing that matters. We keep fighting. Lily solved the cube, scrambled it, started again. Good, because Park called while you were outside. Preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Apex filed a motion to dismiss. We have to respond. Of course they did. The next 5 days blurred into preparation. Rebecca Park turned Jack's cabin into a makeshift war room, bringing boxes of documents, filing cabinets worth of evidence, years of research compressed into crash course intensity. She brought her paralegal, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer, who organized information with the kind of obsessive precision that Lily appreciated and Jack found slightly terrifying. They worked through timelines, connecting drilling dates to core samples to corporate records that showed systematic falsification. Park had subpoenaed Apex's operational logs going back to 1980, and what they revealed was damning. The company had been operating outside their legal boundaries for years, not just on Ruth's property, but on dozens of parcels throughout the valley. The lithium they'd built their empire on had been stolen from people too poor or too isolated to fight back. Frank Morrison came back on the third day, bringing more documentation. Internal memos he'd kept, emails from supervisors ordering the destruction of evidence, photographs of drilling sites that clearly showed operations on private land. He sat with Park for hours, walking through each piece of evidence, explaining technical details that transformed dry data into narrative. Jack watched his biological father work, seeing dedication that bordered on obsession. Morrison moved like a man racing against his own mortality, trying to accomplish in weeks what should have taken months. His cough had gotten worse, wet and painful, but he refused to slow down. On the fourth night after Park and Jennifer had left and Morrison had driven back to whatever motel he was staying at, Jack found Lily on the porch staring at the forest. She'd been quieter than usual, which for Lily meant almost completely silent. He sat beside her, waiting. After a long moment she spoke. Genetic testing could confirm paternity. 99.9% accuracy with modern analysis. Would you want that? Jack thought about it, about what confirmation would change versus what it would simply make official. Morrison's face was evidence enough. The photograph was proof enough. A DNA test would just be formality. Would it matter to you? Lily was quiet, fingers working the cube. Biologically, he's your father, which makes him my grandfather. That creates a relationship category I haven't had before. It's statistically unusual to gain family members at age 16. Do you want him to be your grandfather? She considered the question with her characteristic precision. He's attempting to rectify past mistakes. That demonstrates growth capacity and ethical awareness. His testimony will strengthen our case. Those are positive attributes. So yes, provisionally. Jack smiled despite everything, provisionally, subject to continued evaluation of character and intent. The preliminary hearing arrived like a storm everyone could see coming, but no one could avoid. Rebecca Park had filed their response to Apex's motion to dismiss, laying out the evidence in brutal detail. Core samples with coordinates and dates, Morrison's ledger documenting illegal drilling, Ruth's decades of complaints ignored by authorities. And the connection to Sarah's death, circumstantial but compelling. Apex's response had been a legal document that weighed 4 pounds and cost probably $50,000 to produce. Their argument was simple. Ruth Blackwood had been mentally unstable. The core samples were either forged or obtained illegally. Morrison was a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind, and Jack was an unfit parent using his autistic daughter to gain sympathy. That last part made Jack's vision tunnel with rage. Park had to physically restrain him from driving to Apex's headquarters and dealing with their lawyers the way Marines dealt with enemies. Lily's response had been more measured but equally cold. She'd spent 6 hours building a presentation that demonstrated her cognitive abilities, her academic achievements, and the statistical improbability that someone with her capabilities was being exploited by anyone. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Sevier County Courthouse. Jack wore the only suit he owned, bought for Sarah's funeral and not worn since. It felt like a costume, uncomfortable and constrictive. Lily wore dark slacks and a white shirt, her hair pulled back, looking older than 16 and completely composed. Morrison met them on the courthouse steps, dressed in a suit that had probably fit him 20 pounds ago. His face was gray, skin stretched tight over bones, the cancer visible in the hollows of his cheeks. But his eyes were clear and determined. Park arrived last, carrying two briefcases and an expression that Jack had learned to recognize as her war face. They climbed the steps together, past news crews that had started gathering once the story leaked. Local stations at first, then regional, then a CNN truck as the implications became clear. Billion-dollar mining company accused of systematic theft and possibly murder. The kind of story that grabbed attention and didn't let go. The courtroom was smaller than Norishek expected. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights and an American flag that had seen better days. Judge Patricia Calloway presided, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and the patient expression of someone who'd seen every variation of human foolishness and stopped being surprised. Apex's legal team sat at their table like an invading army. 5 lawyers in suits that cost more than Jack's truck, led by Victor Hayes himself. The man who'd ordered Sarah's death sat 15 feet away, looking calm and confident and completely untouchable. Jack's hands formed fists under the table. Park noticed, put her hand on his arm. Not here, not now. We beat him with evidence, not violence. Judge Calloway called the session to order. Hayes stood to present Apex's motion to dismiss, and his voice was smooth as silk over steel. Your Honor, this case is built on the fantasies of a mentally ill woman and the desperation of a grieving widower. Ruth Blackwood spent 30 years making baseless accusations. No court ever found merit in her claims. No investigation ever produced evidence of wrongdoing. The core samples Mr. Mitchell presents are of dubious origin. No chain of custody, no verification they came from the location claimed. For all we know, he obtained them from any of a dozen sources and fabricated the story around them. He paused, let that sink in, then continued. And Frank Morrison, the supposed whistleblower, is a documented alcoholic who was fired from Apex for theft and incompetence. His ledger is self-serving fiction designed to extract revenge and possibly extort money from my client. Park stood before Hayes finished sitting down. Your Honor, if I may respond. Judge Calloway nodded. Miss Park. Rebecca moved to the center of the courtroom, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 15 years fighting this exact fight. Mr. Hayes says Ruth Blackwood was mentally ill. Her medical records, which we've submitted, show no diagnosis of any mental condition. She was examined multiple times at the request of various agencies trying to discredit her. Every evaluation came back the same. Difficult, yes. Stubborn, absolutely. But completely sane. She picked up one of the core samples, held it up for the judge to see. He says these samples are of dubious origin. We have testimony from Dr. Thomas Brenner, geologist at University of Tennessee, confirming these samples contain spodumene ore with lithium content consistent with deposits found only in this specific region. The dates stamped on these samples correspond exactly to dates in Mr. Morrison's ledger. The coordinates place them on property owned by Ruth Blackwood. Park set the sample down, picked up Morrison's ledger. And as for Frank Morrison being a drunk and a thief, he was neither when he created this ledger. He was a 20-year-old kid doing what his supervisors ordered him to do. The fact that he kept records when told to destroy them shows conscience, not criminality. Hayes stood again. Your Honor, this is all very dramatic, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem. These allegations are decades old. The statute of limitations has long since expired. Even if everything Ms. Park claims is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, there's no legal remedy available. Park smiled, and it wasn't friendly. The statute of limitations for theft is 10 years from discovery. Mr. Mitchell discovered this evidence 6 days ago. The clock started then. As for the mineral rights Apex claims, they base those claims on surveys and drilling conducted during this illegal operation. Those rights are void, built on fraud. The foundation of their entire Tennessee operation is stolen property. The courtroom was silent. Judge Calloway studied the documents in front of her, the core samples, the ledger, the photographs. She looked at Hayes, at Park, at Jack and Lily sitting behind the attorney's table. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Hayes, your motion to dismiss is denied. This case has sufficient merit to proceed to discovery. Apex Mining will provide all records of drilling operations in Sevier County from 1985 to 1995. All internal communications regarding Ruth Blackwood or her property, All geological surveys and mineral assessments. She brought her gavel down. Discovery begins immediately. Next hearing in 30 days. The courtroom erupted. News crews rushed for the doors to file reports. Apex's lawyers huddled around Hayes, speaking in urgent whispers. Park turned to Jack and Lily, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes showing triumph. We just won round one. Outside on the courthouse steps, Morrison caught up with them. His face was flushed with effort and something that looked like joy. We did it. After 35 years, someone finally listened. But Jack was watching Hayes emerge from the courthouse, surrounded by his legal team. The lawyer's eyes found Jack's across the crowd, and the look that passed between them was pure calculation. Hayes had lost this round, but the fight was far from over. That night, back into the cabin, Jack stood watch while Lily slept. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and his instincts screamed danger. Discovery would force Apex to reveal their crimes, but it would also buy them time. Time to make problems disappear. Time to arrange accidents. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your victory. Enjoy it. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit. Ask your wife. Jack stared at the message, rage building like pressure in a sealed container. But underneath the rage was something colder. Certainty. Hayes had just made a mistake. Threatening Jack was one thing, invoking Sarah's death was another. That crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He deleted the message, but the words stayed burned in his mind. The mountains remembered, Ruth had said. Now it was time to make sure Victor Hayes remembered too. The war had moved from courtroom to something darker. And Jack Mitchell, son of a drunk he'd never known, husband of a murdered wife, father of a brilliant daughter who saw patterns in chaos, was ready for whatever came next. Outside, Ghost moved through the darkness, white coat catching starlight, watching over the cabin where 3 generations of fight and flight and finally standing ground were converging into something that would either save them or destroy them all. Discovery was supposed to take 30 days. It took 9 before everything changed. Rebecca Park had requested 17 categories of documents from Apex Mining. Everything from drilling logs to internal communications to geological surveys. What came back was a mountain of paper, 40,000 pages delivered in boxes that filled her conference room. Floor to ceiling, most of it was useless. Requisition forms, equipment maintenance logs, the bureaucratic debris of a company that had operated for 50 years. But buried in that mountain were fragments of truth, and Park had 3 paralegals working 16-hour days to find them. Jack spent those 9 days in a state of controlled tension, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hayes' threat still burned in his mind. Ask your wife. The words were designed to provoke, to make Jack do something stupid that would undermine the case. He knew that, understood it intellectually. But understanding didn't stop the rage that built every time he thought about Sarah's car tumbling down a Montana ravine while men in suits congratulated themselves on a problem solved. Lily had thrown herself into helping Park's team, her pattern recognition abilities making her invaluable for sorting through the document dump. She could scan pages at a speed that seemed impossible, her mind cataloging information and cross-referencing it against databases she'd built. Within 3 days, she'd found 17 instances where Apex's official records contradicted Frank Morrison's ledger. 17 documented lies about where they'd drilled and what they'd found. Morrison himself had become a fixture at Park's office, working alongside the paralegals despite the cancer that was eating him from the inside out. His cough had gotten worse, productive now, flecks of blood appearing on the tissues he tried to hide. Jack had tried to convince him to rest, to save his strength for testimony. Morrison had looked at him with eyes that knew exactly how much time was left and said, "I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now I've got work to do." The call came on day 9, just after midnight. Jack was on the cabin porch, couldn't sleep, watching the forest and thinking about ghosts. His phone lit up with Park's number, and he knew before answering that something had broken. Her voice was tight with controlled excitement. "We found it." Email chain from 1987 between Hayes and the VP of Operations. They knew they were drilling outside the lease boundaries, discussed it extensively, decided the risk was acceptable because Ruth Blackwood had no resources to fight them and local authorities wouldn't care. Jack felt his pulse kick up. That's conspiracy. That's fraud. Better than that. There's a second chain from 3 years ago. Hayes discussing Sarah, how she'd obtained Ruth's old legal documents, how she was asking dangerous questions. And Jack, one of the emails specifically mentions eliminating the problem. Those words, eliminating the problem. Jack's hand tightened on the phone hard enough that the case creaked. Does it name her? Not directly, but the timeline matches perfectly. 2 weeks before Sarah's accident, Hayes wrote that they needed to handle the Mitchell situation permanently before it escalated. The reply from someone named Crowder says he'll take care of it personally. Who's Crowder? Former FBI agent turned private security consultant, specializes in making problems disappear. If we can connect him to Sarah's accident, we have Hayes on conspiracy to commit murder. Jack stood, already reaching for his jacket. Where are you? My office. Jack, this changes everything. We need to bring this to the FBI immediately. This isn't just corporate malfeasance anymore. This is homicide. I'm on my way. He woke Lily, explained in short sentences what Park had found. Lily's response was to grab her laptop and backpack without a word. They were in the truck and moving down the mountain within 5 minutes, headlights cutting through darkness that felt suddenly oppressive. The drive to Knoxville normally took 90 minutes. Jack made it in 65, the Ram's engine growling as he pushed it harder than was safe on roads that twisted through the mountains like thread through a needle. Lily sat silent beside him, fingers moving across her laptop keyboard, already pulling up everything she could find on someone named Crowder. She found him before they hit the city limits. David Crowder, age 56, 20 years FBI, specialized in organized crime investigations. Took early retirement in 2018. Now runs a security consulting firm based in Virginia. No arrests, no disciplinary actions, no public scandals. Clean as fresh snow. Too clean. Lily nodded. Statistical analysis of his case record shows an unusually high rate of subjects dying before trial. 16 instances over 12 years. All ruled accidents or suicides. Probability of that occurring naturally is 0.03%. He's an assassin with a badge. Was. Now he's just an assassin. Park's office building was dark except for the fourth-floor conference room where lights blazed like a beacon. Jack found her surrounded by documents, 3 computer monitors displaying email chains, coffee cups forming a ring around her workspace like offerings at an altar. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes held something Jack hadn't seen before. Not just excitement, fear. I keep reading these emails, and I can't believe they were stupid enough to put this in writing. Hayes discussed your wife's murder in corporate email. Used company servers, left a digital trail that a first-year law student could follow. Arrogance. They never thought anyone would look, or they thought they were untouchable. Park pulled up an email, pointed to the screen. Read this one. From Hayes to Crowder, dated April 12th, 3 years ago, 14 days before Sarah's accident. Jack leaned in, read the text that had been sitting on a server for 3 years, waiting to be discovered. The Mitchell woman has obtained sensitive materials regarding the Blackwood property. She's been in contact with attorneys and investigative journalists. This situation requires immediate resolution before it metastasizes. Handle it with your usual discretion. Budget approved for up to $200,000. $200,000. The price Apex had put on Sarah's life. Jack felt something break inside him, not explosively, but with the quiet finality of a cable snapping under too much weight. His wife had been murdered for asking questions, and the order had been given via email like someone requisitioning office supplies. Lily had moved to another monitor, was scrolling through additional documents. Dad, there's more. Email from Crowder to Hayes 3 days after Mom died. Situation resolved. Brake line compromise went undetected. Local investigation concluded driver error. Recommend final payment to offshore account previously provided. The room went silent except for the hum of computers and the building's climate control. Jack stared at the words on the screen, each one a nail in a coffin he'd been building in his mind for 3 years. Brake line compromise. They'd cut Sarah's brakes. Sent her down a mountain road knowing she'd die when the car couldn't stop on a curve. Park's voice was gentle. Jack, I know what you're thinking, but we take this once to the FBI. We let them handle it all. You go after Hayes or Crowder yourself, you throw away everything we've built. Jack didn't respond. Couldn't. The rage building in his chest was beyond words, beyond reason. These men had killed Sarah, had discussed it in emails, had paid $200,000 to make it happen, and they'd walked free for 3 years while Jack blamed himself for not being there, for not protecting her, for not seeing it coming. Frank Morrison appeared in the doorway, moving slow, breathing hard from the climb up 4 flights of stairs. His face went gray when he saw the expression on Jack's face. Whatever you're planning, don't. I know that look. Wore it myself for 20 years. It doesn't end well. They killed her, cut her brakes, and sent her off a mountain, left Lily without a mother. Morrison moved into the room, sat heavily in a chair. I know. And they'll pay for it. But legally, through courts and prosecutors, in the system we're supposed to trust. You go vigilante, you lose Lily. Child Services takes her while you rot in prison. Is that what Sarah would have wanted? The question hit harder than Morrison probably intended. Jack thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she were here. She'd been a nurse, someone who believed in healing, not hurting, in building, not destroying. She'd have wanted justice, yes, but not at the cost of Lily's future. He took a breath, forced himself to step back from the edge. What's our next move? Park was already on her phone. I'm calling FBI Special Agent Patricia Moss. She handles public corruption cases. This is her jurisdiction. Moss arrived 40 minutes later with 2 other agents, all business in dark suits and expressions that gave nothing away. She listened to Park's summary without interrupting, read through the emails with the kind of focused attention that made Jack think she was photographing every word with her mind. When she finished, she looked up at Park. You're absolutely certain this email chain is authentic, not manipulated or altered? Our IT forensics expert verified the metadata. These emails are real, sent from Hayes' official Apex mining account, stored on company servers. Chain of custody is solid. Moss turned to Jack. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry it took 3 years to uncover this. But I need you to understand something. Building a murder case against someone like Victor Hayes isn't simple. He'll have the best lawyers money can buy. They'll challenge everything. We need to be perfect. How long? To build a case? 6 months minimum, maybe longer. These things take time. Jack felt the frustration building again, but Morrison's hand landed on his shoulder. Let them do their job. We've waited 3 years. We can wait 6 more months if it means Hayes spends the rest of his life in prison. Moss spent the next 2 hours going through documents with Park, taking copies, asking questions that demonstrated she understood exactly what she was looking at. When she finally left, the sun was coming up over Knoxville, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. Park looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Go back to the cabin. Get some rest. We've done what we can for now. The FBI has it. But Jack's phone rang before they could leave. Unknown number. He answered it anyway, some instinct telling him this call mattered. The voice on the other end was male, older, with an accent that suggested New England boarding schools and Ivy League education. Mr. Mitchell, my name is Richard Steinberg. I'm on the board of directors at Apex Mining Corporation. I need to meet with you immediately. It's about Victor Hayes. Jack put the phone on speaker. I'm listening. Not over the phone, in person. There's a diner called the Copper Kettle on Cedar Bluff Road. Be there in 1 hour. Come alone, or I won't show. Why would I meet with someone from Apex's board? Because in approximately 6 hours, I'm going to recommend to my fellow board members that we terminate Victor Hayes for cause and cooperate fully with federal investigators. But before I do that, you deserve to know the truth about what Hayes has done. Not just to you, but to this company. The line went dead. Park was already shaking her head. It's a trap. Has to be. They're trying to separate you from protection, get you alone. Maybe. But maybe Steinberg is exactly what he says. A board member who just found out his general counsel is a murderer and wants to get ahead of the scandal. Lily looked up from her laptop. Richard Steinberg, age 68, on Apex board for 12 years, former federal prosecutor, no documented connection to Hayes beyond professional relationship. Probability he's genuinely attempting to limit corporate liability is 73%. Jack stood. I'm going. The Copper Kettle was the same diner where they'd first met Rebecca Park, and walking back into it felt like stepping into a memory that hadn't finished playing out. Richard Steinberg sat in a back booth, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000. He looked up when Jack approached, gestured to the seat across from him. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Jack sat but didn't relax. Say what you need to say. Steinberg pulled out a tablet, slid it across the table. What you're looking at is Victor Hayes' personal email account, not the corporate one the FBI just seized, his private account that he thought was secure. How did you get this? When the FBI showed up this morning with a warrant, I knew we had a problem. I've been on this board long enough to recognize when someone's been operating outside proper channels. So I called in a favor from someone who specializes in digital forensics. What we found is worse than I imagined. Jack scrolled through the emails, and each one made his blood run colder. Hayes hadn't just ordered Sarah's death. He'd been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened Apex's operations for over a decade. Environmental activists who protested mining permits, journalists who investigated safety violations, a state regulator who wouldn't approve an expansion project. All dead, all ruled accidents or suicides, all with payments to Crowder or men like him buried in consulting fees and discretionary budgets. How many? Steinberg's face was grave. We've identified 11 possible cases over 15 years. Your wife, Ruth Blackwood, we think, though that one's harder to prove. 9 others who got too close to truths Hayes wanted buried. You're telling me Apex's general counsel is a serial killer? I'm telling you, Victor Hayes used company resources to commit multiple homicides, and the board had no idea. We thought he was just aggressive, willing to push legal boundaries. We didn't know he was killing people. Jack looked up from the tablet. Why are you telling me this? Because I spent 20 years as a federal prosecutor before I made enough money to retire. I sent murderers to prison. I believed in the system. And now I find out I've been sitting on a board with someone who makes the criminals I prosecuted look like amateurs. He did this while I was supposed to be providing oversight. Steinberg's hands were shaking slightly. I can't undo what Hayes has done, but I can make sure he pays for it, and I can make sure Apex cooperates fully with the investigation. That starts with me telling you the truth, even the parts that make my company look monstrous. What do you want from me? Nothing. You've already won. The FBI has enough to put Hayes away for life. The civil case will bankrupt the company. I'm just here to say I'm sorry on behalf of every board member who failed to see what was happening. Your wife deserved better. They all did. Jack stared at this man who'd spent his career fighting crime and his retirement enabling it through negligence. There should be rage, should be the desire to make Steinberg suffer for his failures. But all Jack felt was tired. The tablet. Can I keep this? Steinberg nodded. That's why I brought it. Everything's backed up. Encrypted copies going to the FBI, SEC, and the Department of Justice. Hayes' career ends today. Probably his freedom too. But I wanted you to see it first. Wanted you to know that Sarah's death is being taken seriously by people with the power to act. Jack took the tablet, stood to leave. Steinberg spoke one more time. Mr. Mitchell, Hayes is dangerous. Cornered. When men like him realize they're caught, they do unpredictable things. Watch yourself. And watch your daughter. The warning followed Jack back to his truck, where Lily waited with her laptop and her Rubik's Cube and her unnaturally calm assessment of risk factors. He handed her the tablet without explanation. She started reading, her expression never changing, but her fingers on the cube moved faster. We need to tell Park. Already texting her, they drove to Park's office, but she met them in the parking lot, her face pale. Turn on the radio, any news station. Jack found a local station. The announcer's voice was grave, reading breaking news with the kind of careful pronunciation that meant lawyers had vetted every word. Victor Hayes, general counsel for Apex Mining Corporation, was found dead this morning in his Knoxville office. Early reports suggest suicide. Police are investigating. Hayes had been under investigation by federal authorities for possible criminal activity related to his work at Apex. The world seemed to tilt. Jack gripped the steering wheel, processing. Hayes was dead. The man who'd ordered Sarah's murder, who'd killed 11 people, who'd threatened Jack's family. Dead by his own hand before he could be arrested. Park's phone rang. She answered, listened, her expression growing darker. When she hung up, she looked at Jack with something like pity. That was Agent Moss. Hayes left a video confession, recorded it last night, detailed admission to everything. The illegal drilling, the bribes, the murders, all of it. He knew the FBI was coming and decided to go out on his own terms. Did he name Crowder? Yes. With specifics, dates, amounts, methods. Crowder's being arrested as we speak. FBI had a team waiting at his house in Virginia. Jack should feel relief, justice, even if it came from an unexpected direction. But all he felt was hollow. Hayes had escaped, taken the coward's way out. Sarah's killer was dead, but not by trial, not by facing her husband and daughter in a courtroom. Lily's voice was quiet. He denied us closure, denied us the opportunity to confront him. That was his final act of control. She was right. Hayes had spent his life controlling narratives, making problems disappear, maintaining power through fear and violence. His suicide was just one more manipulation, one more way to avoid consequences. He'd die remembered as a disgraced lawyer who cracked under pressure, not as the serial killer he actually was. Morrison called an hour later, his voice rough with emotion and illness. "Did you hear?" "Yeah." "Spineless bastard. Couldn't even face what he'd done. Just put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger." "Is that how?" "According to the news." Park leaned forward. "Did Moss say gun?" "Yes. 9mm. Single shot to the head. Left the confession video playing on his computer." Very theatrical. Jack and Park exchanged looks. Something felt wrong about that. Hayes was a lawyer, methodical and careful. Theatrical suicide didn't fit his profile. Men like him took pills, carbon monoxide in a garage, quiet exits that let them maintain dignity even in death. Shooting yourself was messy, violent, the kind of statement made by someone who wanted attention. Lily was already typing on her laptop, pulling up news coverage. Initial reports are consistent. Suicide by gunshot, video confession. "But Dad, look at this." She turned the screen toward him. The video was uploaded to Apex's server at 3:47 a.m. Hayes' secretary found his body at 7:30. That's almost 4 hours. So if Hayes was planning suicide, why upload the confession hours before doing it? Why not record it, shoot yourself, let the confession be found with your body? The delay doesn't make sense. Unless someone else uploaded it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Park's expression shifted from grief to suspicion. "You think someone killed Hayes and made it look like suicide?" Jack thought about Crowder, about the emails discussing eliminations and accidents, about a network of killers Hayes had built over 15 years. If Hayes was being arrested, if he was going to testify about all the people he'd used, all the crimes he'd ordered, those people had motivation to silence him. "We should tell Moss." Park was already dialing. The FBI needed to look at this as a possible homicide, not a suicide. But even as they made the call, Jack knew the truth probably didn't matter. Hayes was dead. His confession was real, regardless of who uploaded it. Crowder was in custody. The case against Apex would proceed. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless. The next 72 hours blurred into a storm of media attention and legal maneuvering. Hayes' confession went viral. Bofang millions of times, dissected by legal analysts and true crime podcasts, and YouTube channels dedicated to corporate corruption. The FBI arrested Crowder and 4 other men Hayes had used as contractors over the years. Apex's stock collapsed, dropping 60% in 2 days as investors fled a company now synonymous with murder. Richard Steinberg kept his word. The board voted unanimously to cooperate with all investigations, fired everyone in Hayes' department, and began settlement negotiations with the families of everyone Hayes had killed. The number offered to Jack was $8 million. Blood money, but money that would secure Lily's future and fund the college education Sarah had wanted for her. Park recommended taking it. Morrison agreed. Even Lily, after running probability calculations, concluded that accepting the settlement was statistically optimal. But Jack couldn't decide. Taking money felt like saying Sarah's death had a price tag, like her life could be reduced to a number in a bank account. He was standing on the cabin porch wrestling with the decision when Ghost appeared. The white horse materialized from the forest like he always did, silent and impossible. But this time, instead of leading Jack somewhere, the animal just stood there, watching with those intelligent eyes. Jack walked toward him slowly. The horse didn't move, didn't shy away when Jack reached out to touch the impossibly soft muzzle. The horse was real, warm breath against his palm, solid muscle under white coat. Not a hallucination or a symbol, something that existed in defiance of logic. "Ruth sent you, didn't she?" The horse's eyes held something that might have been confirmation. Might have been just the reflection of a man desperate for meaning and chaos. "Sarah would want me to take the money, use it to take care of Lily." "That's what you're saying." Ghost lowered his head, pressed his forehead against Jack's chest. The gesture was so human, so deliberate, that Jack felt something break inside him. Not violently, more like ice thawing after a long winter. The rage that had sustained him since Ruth's video, the anger that had driven him through investigation and confrontation and revelation, it drained away. What remained was grief, pure and sharp and clean. He stood there with his hand on Ghost's neck, crying for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Not the performative tears of a man doing what's expected, but the genuine anguish of someone who'd lost everything that mattered and was only now allowing himself to feel it. The horse stood patient and solid, an anchor in a world that had stopped making sense. When Jack finally pulled away, his face wet and his chest aching, Ghost stepped back, looked at him one more time, then turned and walked into the forest, white coat fading into the trees until Jack couldn't tell if he was seeing the horse or just dappled sunlight on bark. He went inside, found Lily at the table working through calculus problems that were probably graduate level, even though she was 16. She looked up, saw his face, and understood without explanation. "You're taking the settlement." "Yeah, good," Mom would approve. "How do you know?" "Because the money means I can go to any college I want, study what I want, become what I want. That's what she worked for. That's what she died protecting." Jack sat across from her. "When did you get so wise?" Lily returned her attention to the calculus. "I've always been wise. You just noticed." He laughed despite everything. Despite Hayes dying before facing justice, despite 3 years of grief, despite Morrison coughing blood in Park's office and refusing to quit. Despite all of it, he laughed, and it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. The settlement was finalized a week later. $8 million deposited into accounts Park set up, structured to minimize taxes and maximize Lily's future. The civil case against Apex for the illegal drilling was settled separately for another $4 million, split between Jack and the families of other property owners whose land had been stolen. Morrison refused to take any money, said he didn't deserve it, but Jack and Park overruled him and set up a trust that would pay for his medical care and leave something for the daughter he'd mentioned once, a woman in California he hadn't spoken to in 30 years. Frank Morrison died 3 weeks after the settlement in a hospital room overlooking the Smoky Mountains. Jack sat with him at the end, watching cancer finish what decades of cigarettes and alcohol had started. The old man's last words were for Jack. "You're a better man than I ever was. Tell Lily she's got her grandfather's stubbornness. It'll serve her well." Then he closed his eyes and stopped breathing, and Jack sat with the body of his father for an hour before calling the nurse. 3 generations of Morrison men, and only one had managed to break the cycle of violence and neglect. That felt like a victory, small and bitter, but real. They buried Morrison in the same cemetery as Ruth Blackwood, on a hillside where you could see the mountains Ruth had fought to protect. The funeral was small. Jack, Lily, Park, a few people from Morrison's past who'd heard he'd finally done something right. No family except the son he'd abandoned and the granddaughter he'd barely known. But when they lowered the casket into the ground, Lily reached over and took Jack's hand. The gesture was awkward for her, physically uncomfortable, but deliberate, her way of saying they were family now. The 3 of them, Ruth and Morrison and Sarah, all watching from wherever the dead watched from, all finally vindicated. The mountains stood silent witness to it all, holding their secrets and their truths, remembering what men tried to forget. And somewhere in those mountains, a white horse walked unseen, carrying the weight of ghosts and the hope of the living, waiting for the next time the past called to the present and demanded its due. Winter came to the Smoky Mountains the way it always did, not with sudden force, but with gradual insistence. The first snow fell 2 weeks after Frank Morrison's funeral, light flakes that melted on contact but promised more to come. Jack stood on the cabin porch watching it fall, coffee steaming in his hands, thinking about endings and beginnings and the space between where most of life actually happened. The settlement money sat in accounts he barely thought about. Numbers on screens that represented Sarah's death and Ruth's vindication and Morrison's redemption, all reduced to decimal points and wire transfers. Rebecca Park had structured everything to be tax efficient and growth-oriented, ensuring Lily would have resources for college and beyond. Jack had kept enough to renovate the cabin properly, to make it a home instead of a memorial, and donated the rest to organizations fighting corporate corruption and supporting families of murder victims. Lily had taken Morrison's death harder than Jack expected. She'd only known the man for a few weeks, but his loss seemed to affect her in ways she struggled to articulate. She spent more time on the porch, watching the forest, working the Rubik's Cube with fingers that moved just slightly slower than usual. When Jack asked if she wanted to talk about it, she'd said something that stuck with him. He was the first person who understood that being different isn't the same as being broken. He was an alcoholic who became sober. I'm autistic. We both had to work with what we were given instead of wishing we were something else. The cabin renovation had started in early December. A contractor from Gatlinburg, recommended by Park, who didn't ask questions about why Jack wanted to preserve certain elements while modernizing others. The roof was replaced with architectural shingles that would last 40 years. New windows, triple pane and energy efficient, but sized to match the originals. The porch rebuilt with pressure-treated lumber and a metal roof that would shed snow without collapsing. Inside, new insulation and drywall and a heating system that didn't require feeding a wood stove every 4 hours. But Ruth's rocking chair stayed. The cast iron stove stayed as a backup. The hand pump in the kitchen stayed because some things were worth keeping, not for utility, but for memory. The cabin was transforming into something that honored its past while being livable for its future, and Jack found satisfaction in that balance. Ghost appeared less frequently now, once a week maybe, always at dusk, always just at the tree line where forest met clearing. The white horse would stand there for a few minutes, watching the cabin, then fade back into the trees. Jack had stopped questioning the animal's existence. Some things didn't need explanations. Some mysteries were better left intact. But on Christmas Eve, with snow falling heavy enough to stick and the cabin warm with new insulation, and the smell of the dinner Lily was attempting to cook with the focused intensity she brought to everything, Ghost appeared different. The horse stood in the clearing, fully visible, and for the first time since Jack had seen him, the animal didn't look like he was about to leave. Jack grabbed his coat, stepped into the cold. Lily looked up from the stove, where she was managing 3 pots with the concentration of a surgeon. "Where are you going?" "Just checking on something. Be right back." The snow crunched under his boots, and his breath came out in clouds that the falling flakes seemed to absorb. Ghost stood perfectly still, white coat blending with the snow until the horse looked like a sculpture carved from winter itself. Jack approached slowly, hands visible, moving with the kind of respect you showed wild things that allowed you into their presence. When he was 10 feet away, Ghost did something unexpected. The horse lowered himself to the ground, folding his legs beneath him in a movement that was clearly an invitation. Jack understood without words. He sat in the snow beside the horse, felt the animal's warmth against his side, and waited for whatever was about to happen. The horse turned his head, looked at Jack with those impossible eyes, and for a moment Jack felt like he was looking at something that wasn't quite animal. Something older, something that remembered things men tried to forget. Then the horse spoke, not with words, not with sound, but with images that appeared in Jack's mind fully formed, like memories that weren't his own. A boy, maybe 8 years old, running through these same mountains, laughing, alive, dark hair and eyes that looked like Jack's eyes, like Morrison's eyes. A brother. Jack knew it without knowing how he knew, a brother he'd never been told about. The images continued. The boy on a white horse, riding through forest and field, the bond between them clear as sunlight, then winter, deep snow. The boy riding too fast, too reckless, the horse trying to slow, to warn, a ravine hidden under snow. The fall, the silence that followed. Frank Morrison, 20 years old, finding his son's body. The grief that turned to drinking. The guilt that destroyed a marriage and drove away a second son he'd barely known. And the horse who'd carried the boy, who'd tried to save him, who'd failed. The horse who'd stayed in these mountains for 50 years, waiting, watching, protecting the family that remained even when that family didn't know it existed. Jack felt tears freezing on his face. "You're my brother." Ghost lowered his head, pressed his forehead against Jack's shoulder. The gesture was confirmation and goodbye and forgiveness all at once. The horse had stayed because Morrison had stayed, had watched over Ruth because Ruth had been Elizabeth's friend, had led Jack to the evidence because that's what the boy would have wanted, to protect his younger brother, to finish what needed finishing. But now Morrison was dead. The fight was over. The truth was known, and Ghost had carried the weight of memory and duty for half a century. It was time to rest. Jack understood without needing to be told. He wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, feeling the solid warmth that wouldn't last much longer. Thank you for watching over us, for leading me when I was lost. Thank you. The horse stood, and Jack stood with him. Ghost stepped back, looked at Jack one more time, then turned toward the forest. But instead of walking, the horse ran. Powerful strides that carried him across the clearing and into the trees. White coat catching the last light of day until he disappeared completely. Not fading this time, just gone, the way things go when their purpose is complete. Jack stood in the falling snow, feeling empty and full at the same time. He'd had a brother. For 8 years somewhere in the world, he'd had a brother who died before Jack was old enough to know him. And that brother had been watching over him for 50 years, trapped in a form that didn't make sense, but had made all the difference. When he went back inside, Lily was setting the table with the careful precision she brought to everything. She looked up, saw his face, and tilted her head slightly in that way that meant she was processing information. Ghost is gone. Yes. For good this time. Yes. She nodded once, accepting. Then he finished what he needed to do. Jack had sat at the table, watched his daughter move around the kitchen with competence that would have made Sarah proud. We had a good teacher. Lily paused, understanding he meant more than just cooking. We did. They ate dinner in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them over the months of fighting and grieving and slowly building something that looked like healing. The food was surprisingly good. Lily had followed recipes with mathematical precision, and precision turned out to be an acceptable substitute for intuition when it came to cooking. After dinner, Jack built a fire in the cast iron stove, even though the new heating system worked fine. Some traditions were worth keeping. They sat near the warmth, Lily with a book about quantum mechanics that Jack couldn't begin to understand. Jack with his thoughts and the feeling that something important had shifted. Tomorrow was Christmas, the first Christmas without the weight of unanswered questions, without the rage that had sustained him through 3 years of not knowing, without the mission that had given him purpose when everything else felt meaningless. He should feel lost without those things. Instead, he felt something that might have been peace. His phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca Park. Merry Christmas. Apex formally dissolved today. Assets being sold to pay settlements. The Blackwood property is officially yours. Clear title, no encumbrances. Ruth would be proud. Jack showed the text to Lily. She read it without expression, then returned to her book. Are we keeping it? The property? Yes. This is home now. She nodded, satisfied. Good, the mountains suit us. They did. Jack had fought in deserts and cities, had spent years in places where the landscape was hostile or indifferent. But these mountains felt different. They remembered. They witnessed. They held secrets and truths in equal measure, and they didn't judge the people who came to them seeking either. The week between Christmas and New Year passed in the quiet rhythm of winter. Jack worked on the cabin, finishing the renovation with his own hands where the contractor had left off, building shelves for Lily's growing book collection, installing a desk by the window where she could work and watch the forest. Small improvements that made the structure feel lived in rather than just occupied. Lily spent her time studying, preparing for standardized tests she'd take in the spring. Her scores would be perfect, Jack knew. They always were. She'd have her choice of colleges, full scholarships to anywhere she wanted to go. The thought of her leaving brought a complex mix of pride and anticipated loneliness, but that was years away. For now, she was here, safe, growing into someone formidable. On New Year's Eve, Rebecca Park drove up with a bottle of champagne and news. The Department of Justice had announced indictments against 17 Apex executives and board members for their roles in the cover-up. Crowder had taken a plea deal, life in prison in exchange for testimony against everyone else Hayes had worked with. The case was being held up as an example of corporate accountability, finally working the way it was supposed to. We did it. Park's smile was tired but genuine. Ruth fought for 30 years and got called crazy. Sarah asked questions and got killed. But in the end, the truth won. That doesn't happen as often as it should. They toasted with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Lily, who made a face at the sweetness, but drank it anyway. The three of them sat around the renovated cabin, talking about everything and nothing, building the kind of friendship that forms when people survive something terrible together. Park left before midnight, wanting to be home when the new year arrived. Jack and Lily stood on the porch watching her taillights disappear down the mountain, then turned to watch the forest. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks were going off in Gatlinburg. The sounds reached them faint and delayed, celebration happening in a world that felt separate from this one. "What do you want this year?" Jack asked. Lily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "To finish what we started. Mom died because she asked questions. Ruth died fighting for truth. Morrison died trying to make amends. I want to make sure what they did mattered. It already does. Not enough. There are other companies like Apex, other people like Hayes. I want to study corporate law, learn how to fight them properly, make a career out of finishing what Mom started." Jack felt something twist in his chest. Pride mixed with fear, mixed with the certain knowledge that he couldn't protect her from the path she was choosing. "You'll be brilliant at it." "I know. Statistics support that conclusion." He laughed despite himself. Always so confident. "Not confidence, data analysis, but, Dad, there's something else." She pulled out her phone, showed him an email. "I've been in contact with Morrison's daughter, Angela. She lives in San Diego. She wants to meet us." Jack stared at the email, processing. Morrison's daughter meant Jack's half-sister. Family he didn't know existed until a few months ago. The idea was simultaneously overwhelming and oddly comforting. "What do you want to do?" "Meet her. She's family, that matters." She was right. Family mattered. Not the family defined by genetics alone, but the family built through choice and commitment and showing up when it counted. Morrison had failed at that for most of his life, but he tried to make it right at the end. Maybe that legacy was worth preserving. "We'll go in the spring, after you take your tests." Lily nodded, satisfied, then went back inside to her book. Jack stayed on the porch, watching the forest where ghosts used to appear. The white horse was gone, his vigil finally ended. But the mountains remained, the cabin remained, the truth remained, carved into court records and news archives and the collective memory of everyone who'd followed the case. January brought more snow and the quiet satisfaction of living through winter in a home that was warm and solid. Jack found work with a local wildland firefighting crew, seasonal but satisfying. The kind of work that used his skills without requiring him to run from his life. He was home most nights, present, available. The father Lily deserved instead of the ghost he'd been for 3 years. They developed routines. Breakfast together before Lily started her online coursework. Dinner together where they talked about her studies and his work, and the slow transformation of the mountains as winter deepened. Evening walks through the forest when weather permitted, following trails Jack was learning, like the lines on his own palm. On one of those walks in late January, they found the stone building. Someone had been there recently. The remaining crates were gone, confiscated by the FBI as evidence. But someone had left flowers, fresh flowers, still alive despite the cold. A bouquet of white roses laid on the threshold. There was a note written in shaky handwriting on heavy cardstock. For Ruth, who fought when no one listened. For Sarah, who asked when questions were dangerous. For Frank, who finally found courage. For Jack and Lily, who finished it. The mountains remember. So do we. It wasn't signed, but Jack thought he recognized the handwriting from legal documents he'd seen. Richard Steinberg, maybe, or one of the other board members who'd voted to dissolve Apex rather than continue building on a foundation of theft and murder. Someone who understood that accountability wasn't just about punishment, it was about bearing witness, about saying the names of the dead and acknowledging their sacrifice. Lily photographed the flowers in the note with her phone, documentation of closure and remembrance. Then they walked back to the cabin as the sun set over mountains that had seen everything and judged nothing. February brought the beginning of melt. Snow retreating to higher elevations, streams running full with runoff, the first hints of green appearing in the underbrush. Jack's work kept him busy, preparing equipment for the coming fire season, training new crew members, being the experienced hand that rookies looked to for guidance. Lily took her SAT on a cold Saturday in Knoxville and scored perfect marks across all sections. The score wasn't surprising, but Jack still felt pride swell in his chest when he saw the numbers. She'd have her choice of schools. MIT, Stanford, Caltech, anywhere she wanted to study corporate law and mathematics in the intersection of the two. But when the acceptance letters started arriving in March, Lily surprised him. She'd applied to University of Tennessee, not the prestigious schools everyone expected, just the state university 2 hours away in Knoxville. Why, Jack asked? Because someone needs to stay close to these mountains. Monitor the cleanup. Make sure Apex's successor companies honor the settlements. Make sure Ruth's property stays protected. I can do that from Knoxville, can't do it from California. She was choosing to stay, not because she lacked options, but because she'd found purpose. The realization hit Jack with unexpected force. His daughter had inherited Sarah's sense of duty and Ruth's stubbornness and Morrison's late-life commitment to making things right. She was going to be formidable, and she was choosing to use that power locally rather than fleeing to prestigious schools in distant cities. I'm proud of you. Lily looked up from her book, actually made eye contact. I know. Statistical analysis of parental behavior suggests high levels of approval. Jack laughed. Can't you just say thank you like a normal person? I'm not a normal person. We've established this. No, you're better. April brought rain and the explosion of spring growth that made the mountains look almost tropical in their abundance. Wildflowers covered meadows in waves of color. Trees budded and leafed in the span of days. The forest transformed from skeletal to lush, and with that transformation came tourists and hikers and the return of busy season. Jack and Lily made the trip to San Diego to meet Angela Morrison. She was 52, just Jack's age, with her father's eyes and a warmth that suggested she'd somehow escaped the worst of Morrison's genetic legacy. She worked as a substance abuse counselor, helping people fight the same demons that had consumed Morrison for decades. They spent 3 days together, awkward at first, but gradually finding common ground. Angela had grown up knowing about Jack, had wanted to reach out 100 times, but respected Morrison's wish to stay distant until he'd gotten sober and made something of himself. When Morrison had called her 2 months before his death, telling her about Jack and Lily and the fight against Apex, she'd wept. He was so proud of you. Angela's voice broke slightly. Said you were the man he should have been. Said you'd taken all the rage and violence we inherited and turned it into something protective instead of destructive. Jack thought about that conversation during the flight home, about genetics and choice and the ways people could break cycles if they tried hard enough. He'd spent his life running from a father he didn't know existed, and in the end, he'd become exactly what that father had hoped for. There was symmetry in that, maybe even grace. May brought Lily's high school graduation, celebrated quietly because she'd done all her work online and had no classmates to share it with. But Park came up from Knoxville with a cake, and Angela flew in from San Diego, and they had a small party on the cabin porch with the mountains as witnesses. Lily wore the expression she always wore, carefully neutral, but Jack caught her looking around at the people who'd gathered for her and saw something like contentment in her eyes. This was her family, chosen and fought for and built from the wreckage of loss. That night, after everyone had left, Jack found Lily on the porch with her Rubik's Cube. She was solving it slowly, almost meditatively, her fingers moving through patterns she'd mastered years ago. You okay? She nodded. Processing. Today was statistically significant. Graduation represents a transition point, the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Scared? Of college? No. Of leaving you alone in this cabin? Slightly. Jack sat beside her. I'll be fine, and Knoxville's only 2 hours away. You can come home every weekend if you want. I'll come home every weekend whether I want to or not. Someone needs to make sure you're eating properly and maintaining the property. He smiled. I managed 40 years before you were born. Barely. Statistical analysis of your pre-mom diet suggests malnutrition and terrible choices. The summer passed in preparation. Lily would start at University of Tennessee in August, living in a dorm for the full college experience, even though she could easily commute. Jack supported the decision even as he dreaded the silence that would come when she left. The cabin would feel empty without her constant presence, her typing and reading, and the soft click of the Rubik's Cube being solved and scrambled in endless cycles. In July, Jack made a pilgrimage to Montana, to the curve where Sarah's car had left the road. Someone had installed a small memorial, probably family of another victim of that particular stretch of highway. But Jack added to it, a plaque with Sarah's name and dates in a single line. She asked questions when questions were dangerous. She's the reason truth won. He stood there for an hour, talking to Sarah in his mind the way he used to when grief was fresh, telling her about Lily's graduation and acceptance to college, about the cabin renovation and the settlement and the way Apex had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, about Morrison and Angela and the family they were building from scattered pieces. And he told her about Ghost, about the brother he'd never known who'd watched over him for 50 years in a form that didn't make sense, but had made all the difference. He thought Sarah would appreciate that. She'd always believed in things that couldn't be explained, but could be felt. When he drove away from that curve, he felt lighter, like he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying since the moment the Montana Highway Patrol had called to tell him Sarah was gone. The rage was gone too, not forgotten, but transformed into something more useful. Determination, purpose, the commitment to make sure her death meant something. August arrived with heat and humidity that made the mountains shimmer. Jack helped Lily pack for college, loading boxes into his truck with the kind of meticulous care that masked the emotion underneath. She was taking books and clothes and her laptop and the Rubik's Cube that had been her constant companion since Sarah died. Everything else, she said, was unnecessary. The drive to Knoxville felt too short. Jack wanted to stretch it out, to have more time before the transition that was coming. But they arrived at the dorm right on schedule, and then there was the chaos of move-in day. Other students and parents filling hallways with boxes and excitement and the nervous energy of new beginnings. Lily's roommate was a pre-med student from Memphis, bubbly and outgoing in a way that seemed like it would clash with Lily's reserved nature. But Jack watched them interact and saw his daughter making an effort, answering questions, explaining her areas of study, building a bridge toward friendship even though bridges were hard for her. When everything was unpacked and organized with Lily's characteristic precision, Jack stood in the doorway knowing he needed to leave but not wanting to take the first step. Lily solved the problem by walking over and hugging him. It was awkward and brief, physical contact she still didn't entirely enjoy, but deliberate. Her way of saying goodbye and thank you and I'll be okay all at once. Call if you need anything at all. I will, but I won't need anything. Statistical analysis suggests successful adjustment to college environment. Jack smiled. Right, statistics. But Dad, thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to walk away, for believing Mom's death mattered enough to risk everything, for being the father Morrison should have been. The words hit harder than Jack expected. He pulled Lily into another hug, this one longer, and felt her gradually relax into it. When he pulled away, his eyes were wet. I'll see you next weekend. I'll be here. The drive back to the cabin was the longest 2 hours of Jack's life. The mountains rose around him, familiar and solid, but the cabin when he arrived felt empty in a way it never had before. Lily's absence was a presence of its own, filling the space where she used to be. But as Jack sat on the porch that night, watching the sun set over the Smoky Mountains, he felt something that might have been contentment. The fight was over, the truth was known, justice had been served, imperfect and incomplete, but real. Sarah's death had been avenged, Ruth's property was protected, Morrison had found redemption, and Lily was launched into a future limited only by her own considerable abilities. The mountains held all of it, remembered all of it, the crimes and the cover-ups and the courage it took to stand against power. They'd witnessed Ruth's 30-year fight and Sarah's fatal questions and Jack's journey from grief to purpose. They'd sheltered Ghost's vigil and Morrison's confession and Lily's growth from traumatized child to formidable young woman. In the distance, a white shape moved through the trees. Just for a moment. There and gone so quickly Jack couldn't be sure he had actually seen it. But he chose to believe, chose to think Ghost was still watching, still protecting, still carrying the weight of memory that the mountains couldn't hold alone. Jack raised his coffee cup in salute to the forest and the ghost and the brother he'd never known who'd loved him anyway. Then he went inside to the cabin that was finally, completely home. Tomorrow he'd call Lily. Next weekend he'd drive to Knoxville and take her to dinner and hear about her first week of college. Next month Angela was visiting from San Diego. Next year held possibilities he couldn't predict. But tonight he was here in the mountains that remembered, in the home that Sarah had died protecting and Ruth had spent a lifetime fighting for. In the quiet that came after war, when the only battles left were the daily ones of living well and honoring the dead by building something worth their sacrifice. The mountains breathed around him, ancient and patient. They'd been here long before Jack Mitchell arrived and would be here long after he was gone. But for this moment, this small span of time, they were his to protect and preserve and pass on to Lily when his time came. Jack Mitchell, son of a drunk who'd found redemption, husband of a murdered woman who'd fought for truth, father of a brilliant daughter who'd inherited all their best qualities and none of their worst fears. He'd been a Marine and a firefighter and a grieving widower who transformed rage into purpose. Now he was just a man living in the mountains, tending a home, waiting for his daughter to come back on weekends, carrying the stories of the dead and the living in equal measure. The mountains remembered, and so would he, for as long as breath remained and memory held, and the truth needed someone to speak it into the listening silence. The stars came out over the Smoky Mountains, countless and cold and beautiful. Jack sat beneath them, feeling small and significant at the same time. Part of a story that stretched back generations and forward into futures he wouldn't see, but had helped make possible. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The mountains held their secrets and their truths. The ghosts rested quiet, and Jack Mitchell, finally gratefully, went home.